February 18th. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin, I'm happy to announce that Long Meadow was designated as a surrounding community by the Massachusetts Gaming Commission today. I want to thank the town manager, Stephen Crane, for his work on the inclusion of 2 Long Meadow intersections on the Environmental Impact Report Scope of Study. I would also like to thank the Mass DOT and Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's work with Long Meadow on the issues surrounding 91 and Route 5. The Massachusetts Gaming Commission recognized these issues as key in their determination that Long Meadow is a surrounding community. Last but not least, I'd like to recognize our counsel, Brandon Moss. After careful analysis of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission decisions and meetings, he created a concise and focused argument for designation. He has been an invaluable team member for Long Meadow. We now have 30 days to negotiate with MGM before the arbitration process could begin. There is a lot of work still ahead of us. We look forward to working together with MGM and successfully negotiating a mitigation agreement that protects Long Meadow from any negative impacts from the casino project. Thank you. I would also like to announce that a Blackboard Connect notice did go out, but please remind all the residents and your neighbors that they do have to clear around all of the fire hydrants. It's a safety issue, and there is a bylaw requiring that to be done as soon as possible. So we appreciate your assistance in this matter. Are there any resident comments today? No? And we'll move right on to select board comments. Any select board comments for this evening?
Right. I'd just like to thank the residents for their alertness and our police department and their diligence in the recent arrest of suspects in some car break-ins that were in the south end of town. And I think it's indicative of the people of Long Meadow who are alert and aware and are not reluctant to call the police when they see something suspicious. And I think that's worth noting.
Definitely, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we'll move right on to old business. I would ask us to skip the approval of the minutes at this time. I've asked Alex Grant as the clerk to sit down with me and go over them before we bring them forward to the board. So I'd like to go straight ahead to the appointment of applicants for the Council of Aging Board of Directors. We had 2 interviews the other week, a Jim Russell and Alan Hobart, and I was looking for a motion to have Jim Russell for the 3-year term.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
And Alan Hobart, I'm looking for a motion for the term that will end in 2015.
I just have a question before, but I'll wait for a motion, I guess.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I thought we had 2 openings for 3-year terms.
We do, but those don't begin until the summer. And so I checked with Debbie beforehand, and she said there's only 1 3-year term, and then there's a 1 term that expires in 2015. Then there are 2 terms that expire in 2014. So if we appointed him to those other terms, we'd have to reappoint him in 2 months.
Okay, that's fine. That's not the way I read this, but that's apparently what it is, right? Okay, that's fine.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
I've got a question about the minutes.
Mhm.
I know Alex is a clerk, but there's not one set of minutes that he took. They were all taken by Jacqueline.
Right, there was some question about how the minutes, the format that we're going into, and Mark Gold asked us to review that. I reviewed it, and I thought it would be appropriate to have Alex Grant also look and see if there's any ideas on how we might want to change the format. If you prefer to go ahead and approve the minutes at this time, we could put them on the floor and see how many approve, but I was hoping
No,
to.
I was curious, and you just answered that there was a discussion
Mhm.
about the format of the minutes minus 2 select board members. So I guess I have a question about how that all happens where Mr. Gold makes a suggestion of how they're formatted without bringing that to the board's attention, that we at least could discuss that as opposed to having 3 people talk about taking a look at it or talking to Alex and then having a third conversation. I just think that might have been a great thing to have on the agenda to talk about the format of the minutes as opposed to just telling us
Well, I think we probably will be when we bring it back and Alex is here. But I will put it as an agenda item. Thank you. All right, I was going to move down until we could have, Dr. Metz is not gonna be available right away, so I wanted to work on the rest of the agenda. And so I was going down to skip community preservation and capital planning, go to the Charter Review Committee. The last time we were discussing this, Richard Foster had mentioned that he felt there already had been a vote in regards to the charter review, and he did actually review and find the point where we did have a vote on that, and it might have been the second, yes.
Yeah, and there was also, I thought you got word of that too, there was also a vote about a year later for the same committee, and it was denied. So I don't know what that does to the original motion.
Oh, I didn't see the denial
Yeah,
one.
it was when Paul was chair. I thought I sent that to you.
I asked, it was
The
voted
only-
down by the board.
Yeah, it was voted down by the board. The motion was put up again, and it was voted down by the board. So I don't know what that does to the original motion.
My understanding was, the only thing I received in was the charter review. I think there was, other vote was on a charter commission. And actually, the vote down occurred just before the fall town meeting in October, when it was discussed whether we were going to move forward on a charter commission.
Yeah.
And to have that on the warrant. I do not remember one during Paul's chairmanship that we voted against it. I understood there was a decision to move forward
No,
on
it
it.
was,
No, there was, Marie. There was voted down, and I don't know why the issue was even brought up, but it was voted down. I'm sorry, I thought I'd sent that to you, because I did.
No, I just have that one where you showed that
Okay.
the vote had gone through.
Yeah, and that one is on, and who knows, I mean, is it on the books, is it off the books? I don't know. There was a motion that was never followed through on, and then there was another motion placed about 6 months
actually,
later.
it was followed through on. There was applicants where it was advertised and we had one responder.
One responder? I mean, they never formed a committee, though,
There was only one responder.
just one responder.
That was
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I guess the bigger question is, Paul had suggested that we have a definitive ruling by our town council on what we actually could or couldn't do, and I don't know if earlier rulings prevail, or if they did prevail, or because we seem to have some difference of opinion between our town council, and maybe that's where we ought to go back and just get a ruling of what we can do and how to best do it.
Well, I say we move on because I understood what the only thing I had and we put included in the packet was that we did vote on it and I felt we had to move forward tonight. But since there's still question on whether we'd voted on it, I'll pull it off and we'll go back to the attorney and see if we can go forward and how we'll start it from scratch. My understanding was when I received that information from you that we should be
Well,
just
yeah,
going
and I
forward.
apologize, so I didn't get the other one to you. I thought I had, I really did, because it was discovered later. As a matter of fact, I think, Paul, you brought my attention to it, didn't you, that it had happened, and I went back in the minutes and sure as devil, I forgot all about it. Totally forgot about it.
Okay, so we'll pull it off and move on to the next topic.
Can I still think it's important because there's a charter committee that, and I think Dave Martell actually gave his opinion on already. There's a difference between a charter committee and a charter commission. And I think we need to have those defined again before we vote on something, because one can't do something that one can.
And I will
Right.
check with the attorney before we bring it back on the agenda. I'll try to do it for the next meeting. The next thing is casino negotiations. Do you want to give us a little brief update on where we are, Stephen?
Well, sure. As Marie announced at the beginning of the meeting, we were a designated surrounding community, and a lot of the focus of the discussion at the MGC was about some of the impacts that we have focused on, traffic, our existing infrastructure, our existing roadway and intersection capacity, public safety, increase in possible DUIs, increase in accidents, things like that. And those, we've been very consistent in how we have talked about what we believe the impacts to Long Meadow are going to be, what we think we need to do to prepare for those impacts, and what we believe MGM should do to mitigate those impacts. And it seemed clear to me that our approach resonated with the Gaming Commission, and not only the designation, but the report that followed with it, and the discussion at the commission, I think, affirmed what we've been saying, and I think we're in an excellent position to move forward into negotiations.
Richard?
Yeah, I'd like to make one recommendation, that we don't get too much into this discussion, because we have officially entered the realm of negotiations now. And I think we do have executive privilege on that. And just kind of remind everybody.
But I think it's worth announcing publicly that that's where we are, because up till now, we've been obligated to do
Right.
most of our discussions about this in open session, but at this point, because we are going into negotiations, we are authorized to go into executive session to develop negotiating strategies or
Right.
whatever it is. So people at home are likely to hear less and less publicly about our position. So
We-
you're right, Richard.
I would hope.
Or not.
Well, and I think, I just want to be, your point's well taken, and especially that we don't want to discuss communications we may have received from our attorney. I think reporting what happened at the public hearing today, for those who may not have been able to stream it online, I thought it was good for the people who want to know what happened.
Any questions or comments on negotiations? Okay. Moving right along to ambulance rates. You brought the topic up earlier, and we're looking at a possible increase in our ambulance rates.
It was one when we had looked at the rates, we did the internal project to look at the rates and determine when rates should be set and how they should be looked at. At the time, Fire Chief Madison did look at the ambulance rates, and they were on kind of a different schedule because of Medicare reimbursements and things like that. And then, after all that was done, some changes, I think, at that level, at the reimbursement level, occurred, and he subsequently revised his thinking on the fees. You have a memo in your packet that I'll refer you to in terms of, it's a two-stage process. Tonight, what we're asking for is an adjustment in the rates so the ambulance can continue to sustain itself, because there is a non-collect portion, so the rates have to be higher than the actual cost to provide the services, because we don't get paid on some calls because of no insurance or no reimbursement or whatever reason. And then, as he notes in his memo, sometime in the future, probably close to the end of this year, the ambulance fees will be put on a schedule with the rest of the fees, and possibly have a built-in automatic increase, like a CPI type increase. And certainly, I don't know if this CFO Paul Pasterzik is here, and he can speak maybe in greater detail. But I think that's what the chief is recommending is tying it to some automatic increases. And I guess I should go back. I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, there are new rate structures that have come in as a part of the Affordable Care Act, and that's generating some of the need for this change as well.
And did you say it was 1.5%, was it 1.5% change?
1.1%.
1.1.
And that mirrors the Medicare allowed increase.
And are you looking for a vote only on the increase tonight?
Just for that 1.1%, yes.
Mark?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we adjust the ambulance fees in accordance to the January 29th, 2014 memo from Chief Madison.
Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that that memo says that this adjustment will, it will allow our adjustments to be made now, and that ambulance rates in the future will be placed on the schedule of fees to be adjusted on a calendar year basis. So there is no automatic increase here, and I know that's not what you meant, Stephen, but it might have been received that way. It's in fact something that we will have to act on every year, and I certainly prefer it that way.
Paul?
My question centers around, I think this is the third increase in the last 3-4 years, or requested increase? Second or third?
Say at least a second.
Right, at least a second, but I think it's the third maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. My question is this, is that one of the things the town manager mentioned was about keeping pace with our collection rates. How is this ambulance fee, this 1.1% increase, what is it going to bring in, and how does that keep the ambulance fund solvent versus, what's the danger of not raising it 1.1%? Because, and I know we service more than citizens in Long Meadow, and I know insurance kicks back for that, but eventually, I mean, we are using this fee to subsidize a good deal of the department.
Right.
And are we raising the fee to subsidize the department or keep the ambulance solvent, is my question.
Well, I think the answer would actually be both. We currently budget about $550,000 for ambulance revenues per year. So this small increase, $5,500 to 1.1%, is going to keep up with certain additional costs that we're confronted with, whether it's the supplies on the ambulance, whether it's the paramedics, the training, anything to that nature. It's a small increase to cover those additional costs. So, but again, yes, we are funding, a good portion of the fire budget, which the ambulance is built into. The ambulance budget, the fire budget is, I think it's over $2 million roughly. So it covers about 25%.
So my question is back to, is this to cover the real expenses of operating the ambulance, or is it that, so it has nothing to do with subsidization of the fire payroll, so to speak? More in line with expenses of the
Well, again, the part of the fire payroll is there's paramedic pay that the firefighters get. So it is covering those increases also. I can't say it's not covering salaries. It is covering salaries also, and they have a 2% increase, I think, budgeted for FY15. So.
Any further questions? No? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. And now let's move on to the Board of Health late fees. This was something you had mentioned that the director, our Board of Health, Beverly Hirschhorn, was looking to institute.
Well, I should say that this was one that had come up again during our fee analysis, and she wanted to work with the Board of Health to look at it and get a recommendation from the Board of Health, which you have contained again in another memo in the packet. I think the memorandum lays out the justification, which is to essentially certain permit applications are due at a certain, at a defined time each year, and there are a handful of folks who need to be continually reminded, and then perhaps re-inspections done to make sure they're complying with all Board of Health regulations. And right now, there's no disincentive to not being timely with the submission of the required information. And it does take an exceptional amount of staff time to continue the follow-up, especially for it's usually the same people who have to be followed up with. I think she lays that out pretty clearly in here. And it's something that we looked at what other communities do, and there are many other communities do assess some kind of surcharge for late payment of the annual permit fees and non-cooperation with Board of Health rules. So the recommendation here is, and of course this is a recommendation made by the Board of Health, is a 2 times the original fee for prompt payment if payment is late.
Okay, Mark?
I'll make a motion to adopt the recommendation of the Board of Health to adopt late fees regarding Board of Health annual permits.
Yeah.
Second.
Discussion? Paul?
It seems in this memo that it says it's usually the same 3 or 4 businesses that are late every year. But it doesn't give us an example of what that is, what the fees are, what the doubling of the fee would be, what that cost would be. And I would think that there's a simpler, easier way to do this, which is not to issue the permit for that business to continue to operate if they don't pay their bill on time, as opposed to going through something like this, because the fee has to somewhat justify the cost of following up with a phone call, and I don't see any documentation with that. The reason I voted against the ambulance fund is I'd rather was seen some documentation with that in terms of increased cost of what they were. And I'm gonna vote against this because I don't have anything that's telling me what those 4 are. And if it's only 4, the simple answer is we should adopt a rule or a motion that says your permit's not issued unless you pay on time. Or something more reasonable to that effect if it's the same 4 businesses every year. So in other words, we're responding to this because 4 businesses, and that's what the memo says, it's not my words. It's usually the same businesses every year. It's 3 or 4 businesses every year, usually the same businesses in that sentence. And we're enacting a fee to go after 3 or 4 businesses, and I think the way to handle it is, and I just like to know what the fees are, what the cost is, what the doubling is. Is it a $1,000 fee that doubles to $2,000? Is it a $100 fee that doubles to $200? I think that should make a little bit of difference in what you vote on.
So,
Go ahead.
was that a question?
That's a question, and yes.
Mark?
Yeah, I can look up the fees and right now, if you want to, but more importantly, my concern is I don't think we can not issue a permit for these things. I think there's an obligation that if a business is in business that we, if they request that we can issue a permit. The question is a renewal on it and can't, should we be at their beck and call? I thought the compelling argument was there's no disincentive, or more properly, there's no incentive for people to follow the rules. And I liken this a lot to the notes I've been writing recently about residents clearing their sidewalks and their fire hydrants. We're gonna get to the point where if we don't start issuing citations on fire hydrant clearing, why should I go out and knock my brains out and hurt my back clearing my fire hydrant when nothing happens to people who don't do it? And the same with this to some degree. Why should anybody pay these fees? And again, are we prepared to enforce and close them down if they don't pay their fee? And then that's gonna get into potential lawsuits and all kinds of other things. I think the best thing to do is it doesn't look like it's punitive and specifically. I think that very clearly it says we're going to assign somebody from the Board of Health, I guess the secretary would call these people and tell them, here's what's going to happen if you don't pay. And I think we saw this recently when we had somebody who hadn't paid, or there was a problem with the payment of a liquor license fee. When they heard that they were about to have some real problems, all of a sudden they walked in and paid. So, I think there needs to be a carrot and a stick, and unfortunately, this is the stick part of what sometimes you have to
And
to
what was
enforce
that
rules.
carrot?
Was to
What was the carrot?
the threat was to not issue their
Which
the
means what?
license. Well, but again, I don't know that you cannot do that, Paul, in this case.
Well, we did it, didn't we?
Well, we threatened, but.
I think with these types of fees, the goal is to hopefully not have to assess it. The goal is to
Right.
get people to submit their paperwork and their payments on time.
Richard?
Yeah, well, I have some of the same questions that Paul had. Who said they're going to pay any attention to the fee anyway? I mean, they're delinquent, they're habitually delinquent. I don't know why we wouldn't be moving, like Paul said, to revoke their license if they didn't make payment. I mean, they are a business. They're in business with that
It's not
permit.
like not all the fees, not all the permits that get issued are like, and you're right, I probably should have included the original fee schedule that we recently adopted.
Yeah.
But to me, it was the principle of the thing was the policy recommendation by the Board of Health was more a principled recommendation, not a
Right.
monetary one. And so I just included the memo because I thought it was self-evident, just in principle. Again, there's nothing in there now. People will pay a lot more attention to it when they know that it's going to cost them financially if they don't do it right the first time. I think for some of these, it would be very difficult to withhold permitting, and unreasonably harm someone's business interests simply for the sake of a permit fee and an inspection fee. And the fees aren't all the same. I mean, there's different fees for different things, and they're pretty low amounts. But I think, again, it's having it built into the regulations and right on the form that if you don't submit your paperwork and your check by a certain date, the fee will double. We don't have that right now, and I think it'd be a powerful tool, and you probably get those 3 or 4 businesses to comply.
Yeah, and I just pulled up the fees, and they're all over the place. For example, for food service, retail food and bakery, food service I assume is a restaurant, they're based on the volume of business, and they range from $195 to $1,125, depending on, and the $1,125 fee is for businesses with revenue greater than $1 million. But there's also, you know, milk fees, and it could be health club fees, which are $400, or you know, dumpster fees, which are $15. So we probably didn't get the list of the fees because we don't know which ones apply, but there's a whole wide range of fees. But the basic fees are either $195, $725, or $1,125, based on the size of the business for both food service and retail food.
And I look at it as, my understanding is it's costing our employees time to go back to these businesses, and this will at least cover the costs. Hopefully, once that's instituted, we will not be the last bill paid, but maybe the first bill paid when it comes up to the permits.
Yeah, I guess I take it back to the fact if they didn't renew their permit's no longer valid. And public health can shut down any business they wish to based on inspection purposes. And if they no longer have a valid permit, then
But-
they're not legally open.
But, right, but the scenario, Richard, is gonna be, perhaps, okay, you don't renew your fee, so we go in and close the place, one way or the other. And that's not always as easy as it sounds, although maybe it is, I don't know. The problem is, the next day they'll come in and they'll pay the fee, we have to go re-inspect it because they wanna get reopened.
Right.
Our goal is to not have to go in there twice, or not have to continue to do that, but just have them renew the fee the first time. So I suspect you're right, that we close them down is the same effect as them paying late. They're still paying late.
Right.
Our goal, I think, of this from the Board of Health, from what I read, is to have them pay it on time. So disincent them from being delayed. That's all it is. It's not a matter of trying to be punitive, because I guess we could do that now.
I think shutting them down is pretty draconian when we might be able to put in just a penalty that will encourage them to come in the door in time.
And what about they, just for instance, pay the penalty every year and still delay us by a month? Are we still gonna take the same approach?
Well, I think that's something we can discuss if that does become an issue. We don't know that that will become an issue.
Well, that's true. We don't know that it will, and we don't know that it won't. I'm just saying that they have a license, and if it's not renewed, the license is not valid. I don't even know how they're operating with a invalid license for the period of time that they've been allowed to operate.
Well, again, licenses and permits aren't always necessarily the same thing.
Mhm.
And there are many different things you can have a permit for. And so the 3 or 4 businesses may not be restaurants that she's referring to.
Well, that's true, and I'm going food service. I'm thinking food service.
Right, I think you
Yeah.
immediately go to that, but it could
Yeah.
be a pool. I mean, it could be anything, and that's
Yeah.
where that's why the Board of Health actually spent quite a bit of time analyzing this and deciding what's the way to go. And they did
Right.
review the options that are laid out here, and they, like I said, looked at what other communities did, and
Yeah.
they said 2 times the fee, which is kind of a straight ahead. Everyone knows what it means. It's easy to understand. I think it's a sound recommendation. I don't think it's going to cure bad human behavior. I don't know what actually does that, but at least we will have a mechanism in place to incentivize cooperation and offset additional staff time if it goes to that.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'm actually disappointed that we're actually finding out about this in this way. If there's usually 3 or 4 businesses that aren't paying their permit fees on time, there's liability that goes along with that. And you know, I whether it's a pool, a restaurant, whatever the permits are for, I think it's disappointing to find out that we're letting businesses run their businesses without the proper permits. And because if a state inspector came in, what would they do with that business? If an incident happened in that business, whether it's a food service, one of the other things that it's permitted for, and something happens, who's liable for letting that business remain open and doesn't have a permit? And I just, to hear that it's the same businesses, usually the same 3 or 4 businesses, and again, not my words, it's what's put in here by the Board of Health. I find that disturbing that it goes that way. I still like to know what the businesses are, what they're doing, and Mark, to your point, it could be a $195 fee, it could be a $1,000 fee, and you're willing to say a $1,000 increase on a fee is reasonable. It's not punitive.
Oh, it's punitive, all right.
Well, you just said you didn't want to be punitive. I
You
don't,
prefer not to be, that's why they're gonna be calling them.
okay, so we prefer not to be, okay.
Right.
All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, thank you. And now we'll ask Steve Heiss, will you come and present the Community Preservation Project recommendations? Thank you for joining us this evening and all the hard work that your committee has put through this past 6 months.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege. And I have to say, although first of all, I have to apologize for being a little bit hoarse. One of my family members was a very sharing and giving person and gave me his cold. I have copies, extra copies of kind of a spreadsheet, if anybody would like them.
Yes, definitely.
One for myself.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Stephen, do you have one?
Food service shut down.
What I was starting to say also is while I'm here on behalf of the Community Preservation Commission, I have to say that it's maybe the most functional board or committee that I've ever served on. In my practice of law and with my synagogue and with the town, I've served on a bunch of boards over the years. This is maybe the most functional board, and it's really a privilege to work with them. This year we had 14 applications, which for a total, as amended, of $1,132,000 and change. That is, I'm pretty sure, a record both in terms of how many applications and also the dollar amount of applications. I wanted to explain a little bit about the process that we went through as we went through the season of soliciting the applications and also how we evaluated them. For us, the process really starts in late September or early October. We set a deadline of, it's usually the first week in December, and I think this year was December 5th for the submission of applications to the CPC. There have been, over the last 2 years, a great many more applications because we can now use the money for recreation purposes. Until last year, we could only use the money for recreation if the town had acquired the land for recreational purposes with CPC funds. And that limited the recreational eligibility greatly in Longmeadow. That's now been changed by state statute. We got 14 applications in, all of them at least facially eligible for consideration. By that I mean that they were either for historic preservation, community housing, open space, or recreation. The way it worked out, and you can see it on this chart, is that 7 of the applications were submitted by the town, and 7 applications were submitted by private groups, whether it was the Longmeadow Cemetery Association or the Council on Aging. What we did after getting all the applications in, we had a meeting on January 6th where we invited Mike Rabel to attend. There were several other people there. I think a few people from this board were there. And people who were interested in those projects. Unfortunately, Mr. Rabel couldn't attend because of family issues, but Yem Lip, the engineer, was there. We then had a second meeting on January 16th where we invited the private applicants to appear. Both of those were really a good give and take. They were between my committee, which was trying to get more information, and really turn a critical eye to these applications. And it was also an opportunity for us to explain to the applicants what we were looking for, when we needed more information, what our thoughts and concerns were. We then had the public hearing on February 6th, if memory serves correctly, and that was also well attended. There were 20-plus people there, including several people that are here tonight. And again, it was more opportunity for public comments on the applications and more back and forth. And then we took our votes on February 10th. Again, this was, from my point of view, as the chair of the committee, a really good deliberative process. There's no unanimity of opinion for the most part with the members of the commission. Everybody speaks their minds and with different points of view, and we get to what I think are results to be proud of. we're mindful that while I think by statute, we're supposed to be independent, we also don't live in a vacuum either. We are a town committee. The result of all of this work this year is that we approved 10 applications for, I think it was a total of $857,000 and change. Those run the gamut from the largest of them, which is $375,000, which will finally fully fund the complete renovation of the tennis courts, the oldest of which are, I think, 50 years old, according to Jim Russell, who did some research on all of this. Down to the smallest one was $11,700 to put docks down at the conservation land down on the Connecticut River so that people can put in boats or rowboats, kayaks, etc. We had one of the applications that I think was really interesting was for a standby generator by Genesis House. We don't get a lot of community housing applications. This one was to put in a standby generator. I will tell you, we did a lot of homework on this because we wanted to be able to do it. It was supported by the fire chief, I think, and the police department. We weren't sure it was eligible under the guidelines. We looked at the CPC website, which has, I think, 3,000 some odd applications to see if there were similar ones. We checked with the Coalition for Community Preservation, who actually gave us something of a skeptical view. We then checked with Town Council in East Longmeadow because there was a similar project that was approved last year in East Longmeadow for Brownstone Gardens for the same type of thing. And ultimately, we were able to, we were comfortable with approving that. And hopefully, it's one of those things, hopefully it will never be necessary, but boy, if you need a standby generator, if we get another October snowstorm or something like that, it'll really be vital. There is a walking trail. There was an application from the Longmeadow Senior Center to put a walking trail in there. We thought that was a great project. That was approved. In terms of the public projects, we approved the application for the high school track resurfacing. That was, I think, from the school committee's point of view, that was the number one. I think the only one they really were behind. And even the ones that we rejected, it wasn't that they weren't at least eligible, but it was a function of resources, or in the case of the Greenwood Park pool application. We got the sense not that it wasn't necessary, but that it might be premature. That I think people wanted to get more information about pool usage and whether it was a good use of resources, because it was a large application. It was $177,000. So I'm extremely proud of the results of the process, not just the process, but also the results. And I'd be glad to field any questions that any member of the select board have. I will say that I speak, when I'm speaking for the committee, some of the opinions may be my own, because again, there wasn't unanimity of opinion on some of these issues.
I have a quick question at the beginning. Does this spreadsheet's wonderful. Has that been posted on the website, or how would residents know what has been approved?
It has not. It started out as an internal piece of work for me and my committee, so that we could keep track of all of these things. I did notify all of the applicants within 48 hours of the votes. I notified everybody by email, so that at least they know. I could put something, and I guess I could put the votes, something like this on the website. It's obviously not official, and they're not obviously approved until A, they get on the warrant, and B, they go to town meeting. But I could put something like this up on the town website.
Okay. Thank you. Questions?
Steve, thanks first of all, thanks for your work. Just a quick comment. To the extent that this is part of your minutes, I think it ought to get posted as just with your minutes, if nothing else. So people can find, because we do ask that minutes get posted on the website.
That's a fair point. We actually haven't had a meeting since February 10th, so.
Fine point is, minutes, as we found out, minutes don't have to be ratified to be approved. The minute they're drafted, they're public documents. So, but a couple of things. One is, I just wanted to make a comment about two items. One is the Wolf Swamp Field improvements, which last year I was somewhat vocal about opposing a far larger and more extensive project than this, and I think it's been adequately pared down, and I applaud you folks for getting it, or whoever it did, getting it right-sized so that we're doing what we need to do and not doing what we don't need to do.
I can't take credit for that. I think that's Barry Jarvis and Jim Russell, because I think what they did is they did pare it down, and it's mostly a realignment of the fields, is that they're more useful for lacrosse and soccer as opposed to softball, because of the usage, and they track those things. And it's also going to realign the fields instead of being east-west, where they get really in the sun some days. They'll be north-south, and it won't be as much of an issue. So I can't take credit for revising it, but we did approve it.
I guess the question I'd have for you, and I guess it's more about your discussions, some of the requests you get are for improvements. In fact, you've made this recommendation in one case, which is the Genesis House project, for improvement to private property, to private facilities, using what I consider community preservation funds to be taxpayer dollars. They're raised through both a surtax to our property taxes as well as a state matching grant. What's the thought process that goes on during the discussions at the CPA meeting about the use of public money, public funds for private properties?
It's an element of the discussion. I should say as a preface, the fact that it's a private institution does not make it ineligible, or even a religious institution. You'll notice there was an application here by the Episcopal Church. The fact that it's a church, we especially the lawyers on the committee, are very sensitive to things like church and state. It's eligible, but they're eligible, but they're not. It does become a factor again, and sometimes the applicants are, I don't want to say quasi. There's different levels of private, I guess. The church is a fully private organization. The Long Meadow Historic Society is a 501c3 organization here in town. The Long Meadow Cemetery Association is the same. They're certainly affiliated. The Cemetery Association is in some ways affiliated with the town in some ways, but it's really a separate organization. So we do try to take all of those issues into account.
Okay, just one.
I hope that would answer the
Yeah,
question.
that's fine. One last thing, that one of the things that we got today through Debbie, I think you submitted it to Debbie, were proposed warrant articles. And I don't know if it was you, Steve, or somebody who sent them to her. And one thing that I saw is, you just did it A, B, C, D, E, F. Article D apparently has two things in there.
Yes,
It's a combination. Okay, so that's going
what
to be.
happened is that's what happens when you let a lawyer clone his own documents.
Okay, that's fine. So as long as somebody else noticed it, you'll take care of it.
I will take care of that.
Any other questions? Paul?
Steve, in looking at the documentation that you have online, when you look at, because I'm going to touch on Wolf Swamp as well, because last year was a much bigger plan, okay, and now it's just reseeding 2 fields. So I guess part of my question would be for the Park and Rec Director of why that was scaled down, if that was needed last year, and why that was scaled down. So I'll hold that for her. But 2 years earlier, Wolf Swamp Field was actually the lowest rated field on Park and Rec, okay, on their list of fields. So I'm looking at the documentation that you have under the CPC part of the website for the submission of articles. And for that, it talks about, DPW is going to remove our backstops in the clay infields and the two softball fields. And then it's estimated for $35,000 for topsoil, fertilizer, lime, and seed. But I don't see any attached documentation that states that on the website.
And I think we may have gotten an update on that from either Mike Grable or Jim Russell, and it may not have gotten, not everything, unfortunately, not as everything has gotten to the website, for instance, but we did have some questions about that, and if I don't have those documents, I'll try to get them to you.
Okay, and then the other question I have is the Stores Library handicap access. I guess I was a little puzzled to find out our handicap ramp isn't a handicap ramp or isn't suitable for that. But why was that rejected in something like a field, which to me, I understand the needs, I've coached, I've got kids, and I get it. But I would probably tend to say there's more patrons going to the library. How many of them are handicapped, I don't know, but why was that rejected? When you look at,
It's going to be hard for me to give you a single answer on that, just because there were a lot of different opinions. I can give you some of the concerns collectively that we had, and I don't remember exactly who had what. One of the, by way of background, the ramp was ADA compliant when it was built. It apparently is not now, but it's grandfathered in. I think there were some questions, about whether it was really necessary, and there were some anecdotal comments about really going both ways about whether it was really difficult to use for handicapped people or not. It wasn't a clear-cut question. A second concern was there was a request to renovate it, but not really a lot of detail about what it would look like. They haven't really drawn any plans yet that I was aware of. So those are a couple of the concerns. And the third is a function of resources as well. Those were some of the concerns that came through.
and there was a question I had that I forgot, I want this about Wolf Swamp Fields. Why, when you look at something like that, it's $35,000, it's under the open space bucket of money. It's not open space, I mean, it already is open space, I'm sorry.
Well,
It
it's
is
not,
open
it's under
space.
the recreation rubric from what we can apply. It is open space. We took
Okay.
it from,
CPA category, but it's,
Yeah.
okay, it's defined as open. So what was the methodology when you're looking at that? I'm sorry, I read it
Yeah.
under the $35,000, it said open space. But what's the methodology to say, yes, that's a community preservation eligible and approved? What made that fit?
well, it's, again, there's 4 categories. We have something of a chart that comes off the CPC website about what monies can be used. There's 4 different there's 4 different categories. There's community housing, there's historic preservation, there's recreation, and there's open space. It's coming from the open space funds, but this is really but we can use open space funds for recreational purposes now. And I think we just looked at it in terms of, we had a lot of support, a lot of input from Barry Jarvis, from Jim Russell, and from a couple of gentlemen whose names I forget right now, unfortunately, who attended a couple of the meetings, but they were from the Lacrosse Association and the Soccer Association, and saying, look, we've really monitored what the usage is. I think for lacrosse, we actually have to rent fields in East Longmeadow on occasion now. Again, I'm going by memory.
I'm aware, yeah, I know. Yes and no.
Yeah, and there's a need, and that's why we thought that it was worthwhile.
So if you looked at, I mean, would a project be, because to me, in some ways, when you look at Wolf Swamp, there's no irrigation up there, and that's one of the negatives of that field, and that's why for years it was always a low priority, because there isn't irrigation, there's very little you can do. Are those things, would that type of thing fall under the recreation, irrigation of a field like that?
I think it would if we were asked for it. I'm gonna give you kind of a lawyer's. I'd have to double check. For instance, I know the question has come about AstroTurf.
You don't have to give me an answer,
Yeah,
just,
no,
that's a curiosity.
it might, but for instance, I know AstroTurf for some reason is specifically not eligible for acquisition with CPA funds.
Okay.
Whether irrigation is, I don't know.
Okay, all right, thank you. I wasn't trying to put that. And then regarding the high school track, it's under recreation as well. Is that because of community use?
Both community use and school use.
Okay.
It was, it's a well-used track. We've been told it has effectively outlived its usefulness. At the public hearing, one of the things that we were told was that it's costing costing the school $10,000 or $15,000 a year just to maintain it and repair it and patch it and do those sorts of things. So the $87,000, $87,500 we thought was a good expenditure just to get it fixed.
Okay, thank you.
Richard?
Yeah. You really don't, I'm gathering, listen, you don't get into the technical merits of the projects, other than the eligibility, isn't it, Steve?
Well, we do ask for as much detail as possible because we do try to look at the numbers where possible and see where they come from. For instance, I'm going to go purely by memory right now because it's the largest project, the tennis courts. It's, the total of it is $675,000. There is an itemized statement. It's $675,000 to do the whole project. There's been money that's been allocated in prior years. And we do try to see if we can understand what the numbers really are. I personally don't try to second guess Yem Lipper, Mike Rabel about the costing because that's their job. But we do try to take a look at as much detail as possible.
Okay, well, that particular job, I mean, you're very much aware, it's been banging around for 3 or 4 years now, and it started at 90-some thousand, now it's up to 750, I think is the last estimate.
675 is what.
No, I got sheets here that say 750, but either here or there, that thing has a life of its own. I wonder, but you've never seen any plans or specs or anything laid before you, have you?
Actually, if you look at the application, if you bear with me just.
Oh, yeah, there was some paperwork on there where they're showing some engineering cut sheets this time.
Yeah.
But we don't have an actual worked up engineering proposal from an outside source. It's all internal at this point.
That's all
isn't it?
internal, that's correct. And I think because it has to go out to bid.
Right. But I mean, with quotes for the lighting systems and all, I guess that's all generic quoting at this point.
Yes.
Okay. On the high school track, is there any concerns, it's an odd question, is there any concerns for how the track is being operationally maintained now when you award funds to have it rebuilt? Does that discussion ever come up as why did this track fail only in certain spots?
The answer is yes. There were questions about why the track. There's a little bit of ancient history, but I think when the track was first put in 15 or 16 years ago, people were making the assumption that it would last for 20 or 25 years, and there were questions about why that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the answer to that is, well, take what's ancient history. Well, yeah, this is the condition of the track right now. We do ask questions about what will happen with maintenance in the future, whether that's going to be whether that's going to need further CPA funds, or whether that's just going to be handled by the town, by the various town departments. For instance, I know for the application, and it's a small one, but for the docks that are going to be down by the Connecticut River. Who was going to take care of, would that take any more maintenance by DPW? And the answer was no. And would it be easy for them to take those docks out of the river at the end of the season? And the answer was yes, and it wouldn't cost any more money. It's a very simple process. So we do try to make sure that we're not going to be funding something that's going to take a lot more funding from other sources.
Yeah, that was an interesting project you mentioned about the wharf project. I had some concerns that I had in notes up there because it would seems to me there will be maintenance on that. There's trash pickup. There's daily.
Well, they go down there once a week already anyway.
Yeah,
as it
so
turns out. We did ask that question.
Yeah, it would seem like there's some additional thing. So I guess what I was after is when I look at when I personally look at some of the projects, I of course have some questions that come up when I'm evaluating the project, because I read all the information. Obviously, you see, I usually read every bit of this stuff. And, I had several concerns, like on that track, because, I myself have witnessed the fact that the track's not been safeguarded when equipment runs across it. And whether it's an old track or a new track, if it's not safeguarded in the future, it'll be destroyed. It's not intended for that. There's some very specific guidelines for track usage. And that's kind of what I was wondering, whether this got into the discussion.
It's funny you say that, and I'll tell you what. Not this year on the track specifically. We did that question did come up last year because the track was actually an application last year,
Right.
and there was anticipation that there might be a request to redo the football field. And one of the questions I remember we asked was, well, wait a minute, if you're going to redo the track, and then you're going to do the football field the year after that, is that going to destroy the track? And it turns out that, at least so far as we know, there's nothing going on with the football field. But we do try to ask those questions so that we don't do something that's counterproductive.
Okay. Okay, that's a.
Just a quick question, Steve. Two of the projects that you funded, the high school track resurfacing and the docks, the request was higher than the amount you've approved, so you've partially funded them. How is that going to be resolved with the requester or petitioner?
That was done, I can speak to both of those. The first one, for the track, we just felt there was too big a contingency put in there. The cost to do the track, to replace the track, I think is $72,000 or $73,000. The total request was for 92 or 93.
93, yeah.
And we reduced that because we thought that was too big a contingency. And I mentioned that to afterwards to Michael Clark. I happened to run into him, and he didn't have a problem with that. On the one with the docks down at the river, that project sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, morphed or evolved over time. The first part of the project, when it was first filed, there was a portion of that was for racks for storing canoes and kayaks, and some fencing to protect those. That was taken out of that application, at least for this year. Bill Hoff is the person who submitted that application, and after talking with Park and Rec and the Conservation Commission, and I forget who else, what he decided to do is phase that in, to put the docks in this year, see if they're well used enough to merit putting storage racks and fencing down there to protect the boats that are stored there. So he's aware of that change and is fully supportive of it.
Great, thanks.
Any further questions?
Not a question, statement. You did a great job on it. I know the stress you went through, because I've sat with Capital, so I understand everything you went through. And it's interesting to see some of the projects you dropped off, because I had a lot of questions on some of those projects too. So it must have, similar discussions must have come out in that room during the period of
Oh,
review.
absolutely. There was some very spirited discussions.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Oh, my pleasure. And again, thank you for having me.
Wait,
I
wait.
just, I did want to just make one quick comment. This is my first year being involved with the CPA process, the Community Preservation Act process, as well as the capital planning process, and I think one of the things that I had as a goal going into it was to make sure all of the resources that were available to us were on the table to getting a lot of our capital needs addressed. And I want to commend the commission for their work in being open to the town's applications and their willingness to partner on not only our applications but all the others, and be an integrated part of the overall capital planning process. So I thank the commission for that and your leadership.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, it's, we're part of the town, so, no, it's, and we're pleased to be able to work together.
I just have, last year there was, the next step is that warrants are put together, and then this board votes on the warrants to be put in for town meeting. And before Attorney Weiss leaves, do we have any concerns or questions in regards to supporting these recommendations for the warrants?
I'm not prepared to make that statement at this point. I'm still looking at it, Marie.
Anyone else have some concerns on supporting?
Until I emailed Steve, I didn't see the list of voted projects until today, so this is the first time that I got them, the first time I looked at them.
And so if there are, before we come up on voting on the warrants, will you be contacting Attorney Weiss and the committee for further questions? Or did you prefer that I have him come back to answer some more
I
questions?
don't have my questions now, so.
No, I don't think so. I'm just still processing some of the stuff and looking at it.
Okay.
And I'm more than happy to come back if that's what you'd like, or if you'd like to email me or give me a call, I'll be glad to answer as many questions as I can.
Okay, and thank you very much for coming and all the work of your committee.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Can I just ask Paul Pasturzik, who's here, that the next time we get one of these updates of available funds, if you would use the recommendations from this capital planning, community preservation, to reflect what might happen to the community preservation fund accounts following the town meeting, based on these recommendations?
I do have a printout if you want to see it now.
What is this,
He's ready.
a setup, Paul?
Can you just send that to us?
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
send it to you if you want it.
Oh, okay, so you got them all in. Thank you.
There's a negative amount that I've got to work with Stephen on to.
Okay.
That was just, I think, a math error on my part, I'm afraid.
I mean, there's alternate ways of taking care of it.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I can
I'll
share
get
this
it,
with other
yeah.
people, but yeah, if you email it to us,
Yeah.
that's good enough. Thanks, Paul.
No.
Pass that to Richard.
Would you want that?
Spreadsheets, I like.
Like manna from heaven.
Was Paul here, were you here to present something else before we start capital?
I'm just listening for the capital.
Dr. Metz, would you like to join us and your committee?
Are the wires hooked up to the seat?
Ejection seat here.
First of all,
I wanna-
welcome, and thank you very much for coming this evening and for all the really hard work. I know that your committee had a large task ahead of you this year, and we really appreciate the work you've done.
Well, thanks. I think Dr. Swirsky and I both are members of, introduced him, he's our newest member of the Capital Planning Committee, and he graciously agreed to come here and help me hold the table down. I want to thank all of you for giving me the opportunity to be, first of all, attend my other meetings, still come and talk with you. And first of all, and second of all, to hear what we have to say. As a way of preface, as you all are well aware, and have kind of worked with us in the past, we've been trying to change the process for developing the capital recommendations and trying to look at it this 1 year as being part of a first year of a 5-year plan, which then again is part of the first 5 years of an ongoing rolling 30-year plan. More than just, as it has sort of been in the past, looking at the project sort of on a 1 year by 1 year basis. And so that my comments are going to be couched in those terms predominantly. The other thing that we've tried to do, as I think you heard from the Community Preservation Commission, that we have tried to do this not in isolation. We've been working with the departments and the town manager as well as the Community Preservation Commission to try and achieve a broad-based approach to the town's capital plan, capital needs, and hopefully to do make it sort of a unified plan, as well as to not have redundancy in our recommendations. So, and I again want to apologize. I tried to put this in a format I could give to you tonight in paper, but unfortunately my computer and printing skills didn't quite make it. I can email it to you, or I will forward it to you tomorrow in printed form, if that's all right. Again, I apologize. The initial plan that you have behind you initially requested approximately $2.5 to $2.75 million for capital projects. As part of the communication with the town manager and with the community preservation, we, first of all, as he was evaluating the projects, the town manager, with comments and listened very carefully to the comments we had, as well as from other public comments, and several of the projects that were initially presented were determined not to be either necessary or certainly could be deferred in view of more pressing projects. We took the then because of the increased area of responsibility of the Community Preservation Foundation, they were able to evaluate projects mainly involving recreational projects that they had heretofore not been able to do. And therefore, we were able to refer to them several projects amounting to probably, well, you've heard about them already, which left us with a much more flexibility in looking at the projects that we finally did evaluate. So that being said, the Capital Planning Committee looked at the capital plan as presented by the town manager and have recommended that the projects that totaling an amount of $1.8 million, $1.87 million actually be considered by the select board. And if, I don't know, just for your convenience, the capital plan actually does talk about them, and I can go through them if you would like to do it that way, so people can actually see it.
Stephen, to present the slideshow first?
Sure.
Okay, I can go through very quick.
I'll get out of the way.
It's in your packets as well, so I can just sort of cruise through these slides. And this was mostly what was presented to the Capital Planning Committee by myself, with the assistance of some of the department heads. I made the presentation about a month ago, and since then I have added content to this presentation, but everything that was presented to the Capital Planning Committee remains in here. So this is just a brief slide on why it's important to plan. We have limited resources. Spending can vary from year to year. It does take time to implement certain projects. We've talked about already tonight projects that have endured in applications for several years. And then if you are going to use long-term debt, that takes some time to plan for as well. So just quickly, one of the things that has been raised by the board is that, the things get voted on, and sometimes we don't get to see the impacts that these things have. And so I wanted to highlight some befores and afters, and I won't spend too much time on the details, but you can see for fiscal year 13, this was the community house sewer replacement and site work. So it was about a $60,000 project. On each of these slides, I talk about the work performed, the problem solved, and the benefits to the town in the future. And then when we had before and after pictures, we did try and include them. But like I said, I won't go through it in great detail. But you can see the improvements to the front are obvious at the community house.
Those funds actually came from the Community Preservation Commission, I think.
Yeah, these are all, this is sort of a compendium of the projects, not by funding source. That is an excellent point. So then this is the biggest project we had this summer, and it was an extremely complicated one, Meriwether Woodside Williams. We've talked about that a lot, so I won't go into too much detail. This is just, I don't remember which street this is, but this is a before and after of just a regular paving project. And you can see the big difference it makes in the quality of people's lives in the neighborhoods where we do this, and it is an improvement to people's property values because homes just, appear much better. It's easier, or said differently, it's easier to sell a house on a brand new street than it probably is on a street that's torn up and in bad condition. So then this is sidewalk reconstruction. You can see, we do use concrete sidewalk because it lasts a lot longer. And you can see over time, tree roots and other things move the individual segments of the concrete sidewalk, so you have to go back and redo those so they're smooth and not only ADA compliant, but also easier for, especially with all the walkers and bikers we have and children, that they don't have a trip hazard. Guardrails, another standing item we have with all the dingles and other changes in topography. We do have a lot of guardrails in town. And so keeping those up to date is another important project. This one was approved at town meeting as a standalone project. It was the replacement of the play structure at the center school with a newer structure as well as some site work. And as you can see, it turned out very, very well. I think the kids are very happy with it. And then this is the Reynolds Pool renovation, and this is another major project that, again, really highly evident improvements that are making for a better parks and recreation experience for town residents. Right now, there's no picture here. A lot of the work is being done behind walls, but we are upgrading the electrical system at the Greenwood Center. In fact, right now we're waiting on a new transformer from WMECO, but the building had really outdated electrical service, and to the point where you really couldn't add another air conditioner to, like another window unit, without possibly tripping breakers. So this will greatly improve the functioning of Greenwood Center, and also will have a new transfer switch for an emergency generator. That's something that we've looked at in the past to help prepare for emergency, for possible emergency sheltering there. So these are some projects that are in progress. The Barrington Chestnut water main replacement. Most of that was done. There's a segment that has to be done where we cross Long Meadow Street. We put that off for the winter so we could start that in the spring. And then the Emerson Road pump station improvements. I did see these improvements in progress the other day, and it's going to really make the operation of our pump station much more efficient and much better. Another two more in progress projects, the Forest Glen Water Pump Station there. I believe that's either getting ready to go out to bid or is out to bid, and that work will start any day now. And then the Laurel Street sewer main replacement. Again, that was another project that we wanted to start in the springtime, so that should start as soon as the weather allows, which it's looking like could be a while. So these are the slides, the tables you see that I'm going to kind of go through quickly were the projects that were requested. So I'll go through this quickly. This is the project development and project reserve are just some funds we have on hand to do some base level design work and other types of soft costs that you need to initiate capital projects. And so having these on hand are helpful when you need perhaps a study or something else to help figure out what the cost or scope of work for capital projects is going to be. These were the school projects. You can see the list here. In all, about $700,000 in requests. These are other town buildings. You can see another $328,000. These are the parks and pool requests. You can see this a few for the Greenwood Center again, for the Greenwood Pool. The tennis courts are on there, and the Wolf Swamp Field improvements. These are our fire and EMS. A recurring request for contributions of $35,000 to the truck fund to help pay a little bit each year. So when you go to replace a fire truck, the cost isn't so extreme on a one-time basis. The Quint truck that has been discussed is also in here as a request, and the emergency generator that was originally slated for Greenwood. This is a DPW equipment request. The equipment here is compliant with not only our new fuel-efficient vehicle policy, but also the fleet allocation study that was done some years ago. And then these are the ongoing maintenance items. I talked about pavement preservation, guardrail replacement, and sidewalk reconstruction. These are the major projects that we're looking at. Dwight Road, the Cooley Brook Culvert is a TIP project, so that'll be state funded, and that is going to go out to bid in the springtime. There's a drainage project on Frank Smith Road. There's a culvert project on Avondale Road, and then there's an outfall repair on Berwick Road. And those total about $1.8 million. And then these are the water and sewer infrastructure projects paid for by the enterprise funds. And a big, one of our upcoming major projects is going to be the North Interceptor replacement. We're charting $150,000 for design there. So these were the subtotals for each of the what we had originally projected. This is these go back to the original the original requests and the original what we originally earmarked as possible funding sources. So again, that summarizes the total requests. The Capital Planning Committee has a process of evaluating and ranking each project, and it's based on the seriousness of it, meaning the impact of the funded item on a department's ability to carry out its core mission and have alternatives been considered. The second is the urgency. How soon must this need be met? Are there adverse or potentially serious consequences of delay? And then growth. Will the monetary need grow greater than inflation if the purchase is not made? So if you spend $1 today, are you saving $1.50 by not deferring it? So this was my recommendation to the Capital Planning Committee, retaining the program development project reserve, the pavement preservation guardrail replacement and sidewalk reconstruction requests, as well as the fire truck annual contribution. I also recommended the purchase of the Quint truck. For the school projects, I recommended the track resurfacing as well as replacement of the air handlers in the old part of the high school that was retained during the construction. I'm sure, as everybody knows, most of the building is new, but there was a substantial portion that was rehabbed and some of the old air handling equipment was retained. And then Williams Middle School is due for a boiler replacement. And then I had recommended a $1 million allocation for the DPW facility to essentially Band-Aid the issues down there, with priorities being new salt storage, fueling station, upgraded maintenance garage. And this is largely in response to the comment that if it's so bad at the DPW facility, why aren't we requesting money to fix it? And so we decided to go ahead and do that. So again, additional town facilities. I recommended the renovations at the Greenwood Center for Council on Aging. They do need to have those kitchen renovations done. Serving meals is a core function, and they serve many of them. And then the high priority for the stakeholders at the Council on Aging was an exercise trail around the park. And then, of course, the library handicap access improvements and driveway sidewalk improvements. This is something the library board felt strongly about. The parks, I also recommended the Wolf Swamp field improvements and the Blinn tennis courts, as well as auditorium improvements to Community House. I also recommended the requests for the DPW equipment. And in the backup that I think everyone received, each vehicle is described and the age of the vehicle it's replacing is also shown. I presented these to the Capital Planning Committee just for reference. The Capital Planning Committee makes recommendations on general fund expenditures on capital. These are enterprise fund expenditures, so I just include these as an FYI for them. And then I worked with our town engineer and our director of public works to rank the major infrastructure projects. So if we cannot afford to do all of them in this year, what is the most important one to do based on that criteria that we discussed earlier? So my total recommendation to the Capital Planning Committee was about $3.17 million in projects. Some of the projects we did not recommend was the Glenbrook Middle School boiler replacement. It really is a replacement of a backup boiler, so our buildings folks felt that could keep for another year. The carpet project at Glenbrook could possibly be done with operational funds if budget forecasts for the remainder of fiscal year 14 come in the way we think, it could possibly be done through operational money. The fire alarm upgrade that was requested at Center School, that had ended up on the list because there were a lot of false alarms, but through the replacement of sensors and other equipment on the system, the problems have largely been resolved, and our fire safety inspector has said that the system is still good. You just have to replace some of the equipment that was tripping the false alarms. And then there was a request for fencing at the Williams Middle School. I asked, the fencing wasn't really needed, and it is obviously old and unsightly, so we'll just remove the fencing and not replace it. The clerk, treasurer, and collector's office, there's a facilities plan that I've been in the process of reviewing. We have some space that's underutilized at Town Hall, and we have some space that's overutilized at Town Hall, and I want to look at that as well as a community house, and I want to look at a holistic approach for making improvements to expand our ability to have office space. Council on Aging, the bathroom exhaust project was a secondary priority, as well as the office enhancements. We've been trying to do some of the office enhancements internally with town staff. And then the emergency generator for Greenwood was a fixed in-place generator. We've now moved to having Long Meadow High School be, we're in the process of working with the Red Cross to make that the community-wide emergency shelter. And so the shift is now to pursuing a mobile generator that can be used at Greenwood because of the electrical upgrades, but could also be used in other parts of the town. So this extremely difficult to read chart lays out for everyone the requests. These are the 5-year. These were the recommended projects. For the most part, the capital planning committee recommendations were consistent with what I had recommended. So these were my recommendations. These were capital planning committee recommendations, and then these were Community Preservation Act Commission recommendations. And you can see some projects that I had recommended were not recommended by either body, and that's part of the process. So this is essentially a summary of it all. And I'll just go through a couple of extra slides we have, and I'll come back to this one. The debt service schedule, you can see here that it includes the green line as the subtotal of what we have now, and then if we added $1 million bond for DPW, or a bond worth $1,750,000 for the DPW and the Quint, it would extend the life of our debt service, but would not dramatically alter our schedule. So you can see it doesn't make much of a change to our annual debt service payments. I moved his chair.
Sorry.
No, Paul did. So this is the debt capacity. You can see here, and it should be noted that, within our Proposition 2.5 levy, there is not a substantial amount of debt capacity, but in terms of our overall ability to borrow money, subject to override, we've used about $9 million, and we have almost $100 million unutilized. Now, no municipality would ever go to the max on their debt capacity. It is just a derivative calculation. But I just want to illustrate that if there's concerns about borrowing money to do certain projects, are we going to run into trouble with having borrowed too much? And it's clear that we would not. And then this just shows capital spending on all projects. We had a different chart that showed how over the course of the 5-year plan, certain funds go up and down depending on the source of the project. So we kind of blended them all together and then showed if we spent an equal amount, the red line is if we spent an equal amount every year, what would that look like versus the 5-year plan, just to illustrate that some years it's going to be higher, some years it's going to be lower based on the need of the projects and the sequencing of things. So that was the end of the presentation. I'll go back to that chart. Yeah. There we go. The other thing that I did not include, because I received it recently, was the Capital Planning Committee had asked for some context of what we're doing each year in terms of, the basics, water main, sewer main, road repaving, sidewalk replacements compared to what would be considered industry best practices. And the town engineer did prepare something, just kind of shows it from a 5,000-foot level. There are some qualifications that followed in here that he could do a better job giving, but it just gives you a sense of the order of magnitude, and I'm happy to distribute that.
Dr. Metz, did you want to continue your presentation?
Yes, and I don't know if you could go back to the previous slide, Steve, Mr. Crane, because I can't read that from here. I had to be. There's, for the most part, it was the recommendations of the CPC were in line with the final recommendation of the town manager. There were a couple of additions and subtractions I did want to bring to your attention. I think that's the first one, right? You go back, the one two slides the other way. There we go. That's the first one. Yeah, great, thank you. The recommended projects, it's been the position of the Capital Planning Committee for a long time, dating from 2 or 3 chair people ago, that it would be prudent to have a fund to provide for advanced development and research for projects so they could be well vetted before given to us, so that we certainly do second the suggestion that there be a project development fund and a project reserve fund for those hopefully very rare overruns, so that they're not have to dip into the town budget to cover them, with the expectation that the other projects that are coming under budget, that the monies be returned to the general fund. So that's as far as project development and project reserve. Mr. Crane has, and Dr. Weiss have both talked about the funding of the school projects, the track resurfacing specifically. We concur with the importance of replacing the air handlers at Long Meadow High School. Williams Middle School is it's been a subject of a lot of discussion, but we have become aware that whatever happens with Williams is not going to happen for at least 7 years, just given the project. The 2 boilers that are under discussion apparently are at the end of probably well beyond their useful life, and as I understand it, they're very difficult to find parts for. The boilers that are being requested are much more energy efficient, but more importantly, should something happen to Williams School and we wind up with a new facility, the plan is that to acquire boilers that could be transferred and used in other facilities in town, so it would not be a wasted expenditure. The other projects, that were on the initial list, as Mr. Crane has mentioned, were found to be either not necessary because better fixes were found, or could be deferred. So what we have recommended is that from the general fund, that the 2 boilers at Williams School, the air handlers at Long Meadow High School be funded. Town buildings, and this is where we're going to get into a little bit of more interesting discussion, I think. I know that many of us toured the DPW facility during the past year, and I am struck by the fact that it is long past time, I think, that the town come to some decision about what to do with that facility. There are structures, the salt shed specifically, that are probably dangerous, and we run the risk of injury either to town people or especially to the workers there. The fuel facility incorporates underground fuel tanks, which are very old, and I think that I'm going to say this, try to be polite about this. I think that it's very reasonable to suspect that they may not be structurally sound, and that there may well be some contamination of the soil underneath that fuel facility. This situation will not improve until it's addressed. And I think that it's the committee's opinion that the time to do that is now.
Can I interrupt you? Can you
Sir.
go backwards? You're saying to us that there's possible contamination?
I think that anyone who has lived in New England
Yeah.
with oil tanks that have been underground
Okay.
realizes that the probability of tanks that have been underground for 20 years or more in a floodplain, which is high moisture content, there's a very high possibility that that soil is contaminated.
Can I just, I would say the fueling system is definitely out of date and is in need of replacement. I will say, because from some of my brownfields work in a previous life, to some extent, I agree that with Dr. Metz that older fueling systems can have issues with that. The tanks down there, I have since learned, are double lined with leak detection sensors built in. And there are, the DEP has been involved with that site, as you all know, for, I think, over a decade. And so there are monitoring wells in place, so I don't want to create a sense of alarm, but it is an older system that is in need of replacement. But I wouldn't say that, there's no evidence right now that there's, contamination around, that the tanks are actively leaking, but it certainly, like I said, is an issue of concern.
And I think that before it becomes before it becomes a fact that they're leaking, the time to address it, process it, problem is now. The repair shed, the repair facility down there is not large enough to accommodate the large trucks that we have in the fleet. So the repairs on those trucks has to be accomplished outdoors. In this weather, I think is not very, is not taking care of our personnel. As we all know, the facility to a large extent exists on a floodplain. So that upgrading the facility would have to address that issue one way or another. The other option is to find another site to build a new facility, either in town, or some people have suggested acquiring a site in an adjacent community. Now, that's well beyond the purview of this committee to to try and push that issue one way or another, except to bring it to your attention and suggest that resources be put in place this year to start the process of evaluation going forward. Mr. Crane has suggested $1 million for improvements plus initiating that project. I don't know if that's the right number. He has been able to justify that one, so we support that number. But I suspect that it would probably, over the course of years, wind up being significantly more. So going down this road, I think we would entail accepting the fact that it will require future expenditures. Okay, I don't know if you want to have any comments about that specifically before we go on. Okay. The town manager has also mentioned that there are several areas in the town hall that they've decided to defer. Many of the community house and library projects were evaluated by the Community Preservation Commission, and they have told you what their recommendations are. We did not look at those once we referred them to them. The Council on Aging facility at Greenwood, however, is something that I think is very important to town function. It's certainly very important to a large segment of the community. The kitchen renovations very specifically are, as he mentioned, that's a very important component of their function, feeding the elderly citizens of the town, which don't have other options, as well as Meals on Wheels. And it also happens to be a community congregational place for these folks. And to bring it up to code requires that those monies be spent, and that's the number he gave you, and we strongly support that one. We did disagree with him on the need for the bathroom exhaust in the community center. It is very substandard, and I think just for utilization purposes deserves to be upgraded. The cost is relatively small when compared with the rest of the capital budget. So we recommended that $12,000 be allocated to complete the project of the exhaust renewal. The Community Preservation Commission has already talked to you about the what their evaluation assessment has been for the pool at Greenwood and the tennis court and Wolf Swamp, and we let them refer that to them and leave it at that. Another area that has come up is the fire and EMS system. for several years now, we have supported the allocation each year of $35,000 to provide for fire truck replacement. As we're all aware, despite the fact that inflation is low, it is existing, and fire trucks are becoming more expensive. So we recommended that that allocation be increased to $40,000. As far as the truck replacement itself is concerned, we were persuaded by the strong arguments of the fire chief and the town manager that aerial firefighting capability is an important thing to consider for this town. There is a truck that is due for replacement this year, an engine truck, and so that the marginal cost of a aerial truck is much reduced compared with previous years when we weren't going to be having to replace a truck anyway. The question that we had, and it's been partially addressed, but I was hoping that the conversation this would tend to push that conversation a little bit more, is what type of aerial truck is most appropriate for Long Meadow? The particular truck that's been proposed, the Quint, is has marvelous capabilities, and nobody discounts that at all. However, we heard testimony about ancillary costs of this particular piece of apparatus in terms of how it was going to be used, the marginal cost of using it for various non-firefighting missions, the additional, if there were to be any additional staff, the information I have obtained from other sources is that traditional fire departments tend to be divided into ladder companies and pumper companies, I don't know the correct term, but engine companies, I guess is the right word. And they tend to go down separate paths, so the firefighting strategies used in towns that have that kind of dual configuration are different than the firefighting strategies used by people who have a one piece of apparatus truck. I don't know what kind of trainings would be required and how much that's going to cost. As well as the maintenance and general operational cost of the vehicle, I think needs to be evaluated in determining which is the appropriate ladder truck to acquire. And I want to say right up front that we have great respect for Chief Madison's expertise. We took that into definite consideration as we were listening to this. These are just questions that have occurred to us that we feel we ought to raise. The answers are probably there, and we just don't know them. Okay. Mr. Crane has already mentioned that the decision to change from a request from a fixed generator to a mobile generator, which we understand can be funded out of operating funds as opposed to the general fund. So we did not approve that one or go along with that recommendation. DPW vehicles. This is, again, something that comes to us every year. Several years ago, the recommendation was made to the DPW leadership that they develop a fleet management plan that they would guide their acquisition of vehicles. And with the idea at that time that a certain amount of funds would be available to the DPW to be used for the fleet development in accordance with their acquisition plan. The study was commissioned by the town and accepted, and the public works vehicles that had been requested are in line with that plan, and we saw no reason to not approve those. Mr. Crane has also mentioned to you the plans for major infrastructure and maintenance and reconstruction projects, which I think have been, the town engineer has vetted very well, and we support those recommendations. So, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, not so much of a question, Marie, but I have a comment that I think, and this is for the benefit of the select board, not necessarily others. A couple of times here we heard reference to air handlers in the high school, and this is in in the old portion of the high school. And I'm not, well, I am going to probably show my bias one way or the other, but this has come up through the school building committee, and I think the select board deserves to hear what's happened. There are air handlers on the so-called, we call it the A section of the high school, which is the 1971 wing. During the rebuilding of the 71 wing, the program and project managers took a look at those air handlers, and they determined that they were in tough shape. And so they did a replace versus upgrade analysis, and they decided that they would upgrade them. And during the upgrade process, they found that that the parts were very difficult to come by. In fact, they couldn't find them at all. And all was lost, and there was going to be a massive overrun by taking repairs to those projects. And they brought in the vendor, and the vendor said, "Oh, one of those? We know where to get parts." And they went out and they spent, and I believe these are the numbers, and I'm subject to being second-guessed or corrected on this, but we spent $150,000 upgrading the coils and, to some degree, the fans of the air handlers. And they were done as part of the project, as part of the quote-unquote value engineering to make it less expensive to upgrade the air handlers compared to replacing them, because by the time we got to that portion of the project, as most people may recall, we were starting to watch our funds a little bit more closely. At the time, so as of today, we have brand-new coils and new fans, I believe, also. The concern is, by some, that those air handlers are essential, and I use that term as somebody else's term, not mine, that those air handlers are essential to maintaining air conditioning in the office portion of the high school, which is the administration portion, and that were they to fail, it would be an extraordinarily extended downtime before they could replace that. And again, most of the windows are fixed windows. And so the recommendation is, well, you've got, I don't know, 1971, pick the number, 40-year-old air handlers, although the coils and fans, or it might have been the coils and motors, were literally replaced a couple of months ago at a cost of a few $100,000. And so because of that, our town, I don't think it's the maintenance department, has put these replacement of these on the capital project. The school building committee has expressed a opposition to the need for replacing these. Not necessarily an opposition for the project, but they specifically it was either the last meeting or the meeting before that, where this was discussed, it became very clear from both the school project engineer, the school school building committee, that we've got rebuilt air handlers there. You know, they could last 15 minutes and they could last 15 years. Clearly, the last coils hadn't been replaced since 1971. The contractor who did the work feels very strongly that they've been significantly upgraded. The school department has indicated, and our maintenance department has responded, that these are of critical nature, and I believe that's the reason that they showed up on the replacement schedule. Now, I know, I'd hope somebody else has, if I've misspoken here, would correct this, but, you know, one of the things that the school building committee considered or talked, but didn't really, is, you know, instead of putting in a significant amount of money to replace those, if there truly are critical parts, why don't we buy the critical spare parts and put them on the shelf for a whole lot less than buying whole new air handlers and replacing them? So there's a lot of, I would say, from the people who have most recently looked at our high school facilities, there is some reluctance to support the new air handler project. And Stephen, I don't know, you or Dr. Metz, if you folks have response or other comments to that, but I just thought, that's my understanding, and I thought the rest of the select board ought to hear that as well.
I think you're right, this has been a big issue, and I think one of the air handlers was fixed. I don't know that they did those upgrades on all of them. But I think the point is well taken. It was first, when one of the units went down, they thought it was,
Oh, it's all-
it was
all is lost.
all is lost. And then they found a local HVAC contractor who had it was a challenge getting the parts, but they were able to do it and fix it, I think, for tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
I'm not an HVAC guy, but from what I understand from both the project manager from Gilbane, as well as our own maintenance staff, the people who are actually up there looking inside the cabinets of these things, that there's more to them than the components that have been replaced. And that in that same meeting, it was Tony leaned over and said they've lived their life. And so, since I'm not as proficient in the specifics of the equipment and what could go wrong with them, our building departments, who will ultimately be the ones on the roof trying to get them fixed if they do go down, have said that they have been through all of that, and that this was their top priority for school buildings. But certainly, if we can do more research, and I think they've done a lot of research, but if there are more questions to be answered, we can certainly go back to them and say, is there a different way to resolve these issues? I think it's really only a matter of time before something needs to be done, and I think I want to also clarify that the reason why it wasn't done with the overall project, as you noted, was it's really tied to the reimbursement of the cost, because it's renovation. It doesn't get reimbursed by the state at all, and that's one of the reasons why the cost they passed on replacing it up front, and I think they thought they'd see how long they would last. So yes, I think there is an ongoing discussion about whether this is a project that can be deferred or not. Like I said, in my discussions with the folks who are involved and hands-on with the equipment, they had suggested that should be done, but we can certainly ask more questions.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we just have to find out, did we misspend money just recently? Because it was, that project money that was spent on it was 100% town money. There was no state reimbursement, but either one was. Did we misspend project money repairing them when they should have been replaced, or are we prematurely spending capital money now to replace them when in fact they may have been repaired? And again, I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable. I'm just reporting the discussion, so.
I'm sorry.
And I guess specifically your question would be, can we buy spare parts to have them set aside in order to prepare for possible breakdowns?
It was clearly, I heard about it first time at the school building committee meeting, so but the way it was presented was, these are gone, they don't make, and this contractor, the second contractor, I guess, who came in, said, oh, we know where to get parts for this stuff. And the way it was expressed at that point, and I don't know if I got a fair representation, was that if it was to break, it would be very, very difficult and a very long delivery time in a building that could get very warm and people are supposed to work there, that you can't afford to have this down a long period of time. And so if that's really the concern, have we considered, spending some amount of dollars and duplicating the critical spare parts as an alternative to just buying new air handlers, which, by the way, you buy a new air handler and there's no guarantee it's not going to break the couple of months later anyway.
Day one.
Or whatever. Dr. Metz had a comment.
Just as a comment, it's still 40 years old, the air handlers. And much like an old car, the things tend to come apart more quickly the older it gets. And at some point, you will have to replace them. I guess the question also has to be asked, is now the time to do it? Or is it something that could be put off if there's a project on the list that wouldn't be funded absent the extra funds from the air handlers?
Richard?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion, but I think there's a lot of confusion between what A and B parties said. It'd be nice if we knew what was done, how much money was spent, the exact details. I mean, we're gonna need that to make this decision anyway. And,
We probably ought to have Bobby Barquette and Peter Greenberg. They were intimately involved with this whole decision and how it was repaired, so we can find out from them.
yeah, because I don't think we've got all the information on that.
Paul?
Yeah, I just want one comment on that, and then I gotta ask some questions of Dr. Metz. Mark, you mentioned there was an analysis done, I'm assuming during the project being built about the air handlers, because that is the seventies one you're talking about.
Correct.
So if the analysis was done, why aren't we going back to the people who did the analysis and their E&O insurance and saying, because this is one of those projects you could say, well, it wasn't reimbursable, we were gonna pay for it anyway. And that's how you can hide a lot of money in a construction project, that we were gonna pay for it, it's not part of the reimbursement. But if an analysis was done, then somebody should be on the hook for the analysis that those were in working order and gonna last. And secondly, the last comment I'll have about that situation is that it's not critical learning. If the air conditioner breaks down in the office, the kids still go to school, the kids still get taught and that type of thing. And I think when you talk about priorities, there are priorities in that. Dr. Metz, you sent me this, first of all, thank you. I know your schedule was a little tight this year. But you sent me this email, which I think we had something similar to this. And it looks to me, the allocation from the general fund budget was $1.1 million. And it looks like you're about $775,000 over. Where are we getting the money? Because I only saw one thing, and I could be wrong, but I only saw one thing that was, and I think it was the backhoe that had $48,000 shifted over to water and sewer retained earnings, and $48,000 was general fund allocation. I think that's where I saw that. I didn't see anything else kind of pushed aside.
The two trucks, the backhoe and the
Okay,
foreman, which I'm not sure what that is, it's a waste, that all
The
went
skid
to
steer
the
load,
the enterprise funds. So, what they have tried to do every year is try to determine the appropriate allocation, the cost of these vehicles to what fraction of time they're used in these various projects. So that's where the division came from. It was provided to me by the DPW administration.
Okay, but in years past, when capital planning was given an allocation of dollars, it came back with a ranking of those allocations, and then if whatever else was, even if capital said we'd like to have these projects funded, but we don't have the money for them, we still like to see those funded, and these are the ones we think they either don't need to be funded or could be deferred. What I'm missing, and from my point of view, is your recommendation for the $1.1 million that's allocated to capital planning of what should be funded. Because what I have is unless I'm reading this wrong, I have $1,870,000. But you're allocated $1.1 million. I'd rather see the capital planning committee come back and say, these are the $1.1 million worth of projects we believe should be funded. Because capital planning doesn't have the power to authorize bonding. It doesn't have the power to say, take them out of water and sewer retained earnings. I know you allocated those, but still, that's a board decision and nothing to do with the recommendation. So the question I have is, have you ranked these? Do you have them ranked that with a cutoff line of that 1.1 million?
No, we didn't do that this year.
Okay.
We divided them between the various departments in order of ranking, but the rank of in between departments, we sort of had to leave to the town manager.
Okay, so if a project is under town buildings, they're technically ranked a matter of importance, so the bottom should be the last one the least of importance, is that
That's what we
accurate?
tried to do.
Pardon?
That's what we tried to do.
Okay. All right.
Could I add something in terms of the preparation of the recommendations from me to the capital planning committee? When the board discussed the capital policy and whether or not it should be changed from the 2% of general fund, which would be the 1.1 million, to either increase or keep it the same, it was suggested that the board should review the capital projects first and then make a decision on the policy. So since the 2% is the policy of record at this time, we kept the 1.1 million in there for reference, but it was the board's directive to review the projects and then review the policy. So that's why it's presented in the format it is.
Richard?
Yeah, I've got about 5 days' worth of questions. I don't know, I don't think we're gonna get into it tonight. The one thing I would like to mention, I'm very, very disappointed in something tonight. I spent a day and a half working on this program. And I come in here and I see a presentation and there's projects that have been dropped. And I didn't know they'd been dropped. And I've been wasting my own time researching them and going back over previous years. It's very regretful, but I think it's also avoidable. And I don't know where these sheets came from or all these changes were dropped, and then maybe it's great, but why did I waste my time? I should have had accurate information. Another note I'd like to bring, this is what we had 2013, 2017. We had a substantial amount of information printed for every select board member and for the committee. This year we had a drive. And, you know, I'm sitting home copying sheets off my own computer, and Debbie got some for me, didn't get them all. And I think I spend time on this program, and I would like to see a printout. I don't think I should have to sit home and use my own personal copier to copy sheets and to do this routine. I think we should have something like this brought out. And I don't know if you guys did you get a book like this year?
We didn't get a book, we got a thumb drive.
Okay, we got a thumb drive, and this is what we had prior, and this is what we had for years and years and years. And I'd like to see us go back to this. I think it's an appropriate format, even if we took a survey and said who wants the book and who doesn't want the book. I got too many questions for tonight, but I did have one quick question. You gave these best practices, and you got concrete sidewalk feet. Is it square feet,
I think the unit of measure there is linear feet.
linear foot? And you say best maintenance practice is 8,000 linear foot, which, about a mile and a half. We got 96 miles of sidewalks. So that's 75 years of best maintenance practice. I don't
I
think.
didn't produce that, so
Okay.
I,
Why
I,
would you
I will
suppose-
wither on
yeah.
cross-examination on that, Rich,
Yeah.
I didn't produce it.
But you were the presenter.
Right, but not the producer.
Okay, is there anybody? No one there? Okay, you're the presenter.
I'm happy to discuss it with you.
Okay, had same question. No, I think it's great, personally, but I'd like to know what the figures are, because,
There were, when I went over it with the town engineer, there were a lot of layers to it that
Yeah.
I knew I wouldn't be able to delve into in that format.
it's like an
Um,
onion.
What's that?
It's like an onion, we're peeling back
It was just something,
layers.
I think it was more, we've talked about the need to do that kind of in-depth analysis.
Mhm.
The committee had asked for kind of an illustration of where we stand versus best practices, and so we tried to illustrate, you know, loosely how we do it, but again, there are qualifiers and layers to that that are beyond my ability to describe effectively.
Right.
I could certainly have a narrative produced to go with that, but it was asked for to kind of look at it on a comparative basis over the 5 years, and so that's what we tried to do.
I guess my point, Stephen, is that the document is dropped on the table, and unless it's challenged, it becomes the law of the land. And that's why I looked at it and I said, this does not represent what's real, because our sidewalks aren't gonna last 75 years. I mean, I know that and you know that. Concrete just doesn't last that long. And so this figure just grossly underestimates the real problem out there. And I was wondering, you know, like when you get over onto water, or the water main replacements, you know, what are we doing? I mean, what sizes, you know, there's so many questions that it opens up, other than it is a pretty graphic, but it presents a picture, like this presents a picture that we're ducky shape on water. No, excuse me, this goes the opposite way. Actually, we're likely better shape on sidewalks. And I really don't think we are at our current funding levels. I think we've got so many bad sections now. I mean, we've got a critical backstop or load to get taken care of before we can get up, and then when we get up, we can go. But that's why I hate seeing like these things drop, because it makes it look like everything's good.
I actually took the opposite takeaway, but
Or you think we're good?
no, I don't think we're good. I
Oh,
think
okay.
to me, the snapshot illustration affirmed what you had presented previously to the board, but that's how I looked at it.
Yeah, because I would think that we need to be replacing a lot more than 8,000 linear foot of sidewalk per year if we got 96 miles. I think we'll come up short again. But it is a start. And I haven't looked at the road surface, and I'll look at those later. I just spent some time going through here, and when I got to the automobile section again, it really, really, really gets confusing. The numbers and the mileages and sometimes the ages of the vehicles don't match up to the data that we had available, like the survey data. And I had a very difficult time lacing those back and forth and seeing what took place. And I can send you the questions I have if you
Sure.
prefer, because I certainly don't want to get into them now, but there was a lot of questions as we went through the program, and I would anticipate that we are going to discuss this more.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I would plug
We
for
can put
this.
those together.
Yeah.
For sure. I guess I understood past practice to be thumb drives because it does take a lot of resources to produce the paper copy.
Right.
I prefer paper copies. That's why I don't have a laptop or an iPad at these meetings. I have my binder.
Yeah.
So we can certainly produce one. Does anybody else want
Well,
one?
Yeah,
Big-
Stephen
big-
inherited because we used Robbins last year too, we had thumb drives too.
Right.
But
Well,
like I said, we will happily produce paper copies upon request.
yeah, this is 1317. Okay.
The other thing is, can I answer a previous question? Because I do have, on
From
the
me?
handlers? On the air handlers?
I didn't ask a question, I don't think.
Well, you asked about what had been done, what was
Oh,
spent.
yeah, more definitive information.
Yeah, it was one fan assembly was replaced at a cost of $8,400. That was in the backup material to the request.
Was that the motor, or, do you know, or this is fan, was it the whole assembly?
I think they call it the motor and the squirrel cage.
Okay,
is how
motor and
they-
squirrel
is how
cage, right,
those
it was the
guys-
fan assembly.
Yeah, fan
Not
assembly.
the AC coils or anything else, just the.
I don't think
So
they-
are we talking about the replacement of condenser units now? Because Mark was saying coils and fans, that sounds like a condenser unit.
I think it was the smaller level of repair that got the unit going again.
But I mean, what is defective up there now? Do you know, Mark, is it
I
the
don't,
actual
I
condensers?
don't know,
No.
and that's
There's
one
nothing
thing we've
defective,
got to
they're working
verify.
fine.
Oh, no, I mean, what do we anticipate is gonna fail?
Just nothing. We anticipate they're 40 years old.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is air handling, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in a building like that are a system.
Mm-hmm.
And even though building A is a separate wing and is separated by doors and things like that, so in the summertime, when the administration is still, I mean, they're year-round employees, their AC needs are year-round, whereas in the other parts of the school, they may not need air conditioning going during the summer months unless they're
They're
using
not
the
using
building.
much AC right now.
So, but when you have a building, especially when doors open and close, it's a very sophisticated commissioning process that balances everything out, and I really don't understand much of it. If I did, I'd be doing that for a living because that's a pretty lucrative deal. But the thought was, there was a challenge in getting parts, even though the contractor said they can continue to kind of Band-Aid these. They are 40 years old, it is only a question of when, and now that the building is all of the HVA systems are now coming online and the system is going to be commissioned as a whole, now is really the right time to do this, so we're not, always having to relook at the commissioning and things like that. So, again, I'm happy to answer additional questions about it, but the people who to me knew the most about it felt strongly that this was a need.
Yeah, and I am fortunate enough to have schooled and worked in the trade and had a business, so I love to talk about the system. That's what I was asking. It sounds like what you said is condensing units, which is a whole different thing than just a squirrel cage and a fan assembly. But it sounds like
We
there's,
probably ought to get
Yeah.
somebody in here who knows what they're really talking about,
yeah.
as opposed to me who's trying to report something third hand.
Yeah, and there was a decision made at that point to leave them in place. And it certainly, that wasn't a value engineering decision, that was because value engineering has you a cheaper way of obtaining the same desired results, and we certainly didn't get the same desired results with this movement, we just got a cheap fix.
Well, I think that's the value in value engineering. I think if we'd done it through it's town side money, no matter how you slice it, because it's not gonna get reimbursed by the MSBA. And so doing it this way is more cost effective because we're not paying Gilbane and paying their markup and going through that process. We're just going directly to point to a bidding out the job and going right to a contractor. So it'll be cheaper to do it this way.
Okay, but you're stretching the meaning of value engineering
We are.
to the point of breakage.
I guess the other question, Stephen, that I would ask as we find out what's really going on here is this a squeaky wheel, pardon the pun, or is this really the highest need for HVAC systems in all the town buildings? In other words, do we have something at Town Hall or Greenwood Center or at the community house that may have a higher need, but it's just that we've been looking at this, and somebody's been looking at it and said, gee, now we ought to do something about it, because it's not broken. We have other HVAC systems or other capital needs that aren't broken, but might be preventive maintenance, if you will, and so we might want to look at it in that relative view as well.
I did ask that question, because when I met, I'm sure, as everyone knows, the town manager's recommendation comes through reviewing the submissions, meeting with the individual department heads and relevant staff, and asking many of the same questions you're asking. And I did have that question with them, and I did ask them to rank the priorities, and this was the top priority for the buildings team, for the buildings department. And I know the Williams Middle School boiler issue has come up and been discussed, and in the context of, are we gonna have a Williams Middle School in the near future? And that was another one where the need for the new boiler was so great that the timeline for a new middle school, if there's going to be one, would be outside what they expected the lifespan of the existing boiler to be. So it's, I have asked a lot of these questions. I mean, it was a couple months ago, but I did, press them on a lot of these issues.
Thank you.
Paul?
One more question, Dr. Metz. In your notes on your sheet that you just sent me, it says the Williams Middle School boilers are beyond repair.
Oh, well,
But-
I
but
meant
they're-
beyond their useful life, so that.
Okay,
it's
well,
not-
it's just like beyond repair. So they're
Go ahead.
beyond their useful life, but they're working, correct?
working,
Otherwise,
yes.
they wouldn't be in school.
Yes, true.
Okay, so,
As I understand it, the parts for them are no longer available, so that should they break down, it would be rather devastating. I guess that's what I meant by beyond
no,
repair.
I've heard those lines before,
Oh,
parts are
you know.
unavailable, not from you, but from school boilers.
From a repairman.
No, from school boilers in my past life, but in previous meetings, but, okay, that's it, thank you.
Okay. I have sent a copy, the same copy I sent you, I sent to Ms. House, so that it'll be on your computer tomorrow morning.
Can I get a copy of what you sent up? In other words, the real sheets? I don't-
All the applications that were submitted originally were on the flash drive.
Yeah, but you dropped a lot of stuff off.
Right, my recommendations are contained in the presentations in your packet,
In what pack?
in tonight's select board packet.
Oh, okay.
And I think I had sent an earlier version as well after I had transmitted to the capital planning committee.
We got 2 drives, was one of them. No?
I got a drive a month and a half ago.
And I never got a drive.
This is
Yeah, you
new.
didn't
This
got
is
it?
all, this is all a derivative of what was on those flash drives. It's just a repackaging of it.
Oh, yeah, I understand, but I
Mhm.
wish I'd seen the repackaging a day and a half ago.
No.
Because I wouldn't have been
Okay,
Working.
yeah, you can get one.
repackaging. So it's it's nestled into one of these files you sent?
Right, in the package Debbie sent out Friday, the presentation is in there,
Okay.
that was up here.
It had a goofy title to it, though. It didn't say capital on it. Some.
I think it's
said
the fiscal
something-
year 2015 plan or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions for Dr. Metz or the capital planning committee? No? Did you want to add anything, Paul? I know you stayed.
No, I pretty much concur with Dr. Metz's presentation, and I have nothing to add to the questions, particularly the ones Richard asked, because some of the information just hasn't been provided to us in that amount of detail. So I guess you, for instance, with the air handlers, you just have to get people in who have more familiarity with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not an easy task to
And-
get all the information that you guys need for processing. There's so many details.
And it was a difficult job, I know, because we had so many needs in town and trying to narrow it down to that smaller amount, and we appreciate that work. And the input you've given to us in regards to the DPW and peeking a little bit behind the curtain on some of these other projects. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I just want to ask, Paul, can I ask you a question? What numbers were, because I didn't follow your original questioning about the numbers that our capital stabilization funding, new funding will be $1.1 million, right? So where did you see something greater than that? Because,
Mark, if you'll give me your email address, I'll send it to you too. That's where you got it
same as
from.
everybody else, it's mgold@longmeadow.org.
In that, Mark, there's a lot of columns over there, and it says recommended by capital
Right,
planning.
I saw that one.
Refer to community, it's very similar to that. It's not quite the same as the one we
Okay,
have, but
okay,
similar.
all right.
And on the bottom was the 1.87 million.
Okay, that's fine, because I didn't see that. Okay, thanks.
Send me a copy too, would you?
And
Steve?
some of the numbers in my table may not necessarily line up because, as you heard from both
Okay.
Mr. Weiss and Dr. Metz, the pricing of things kind of evolved over time, and it didn't necessarily keep up with what I tried to keep this as original as possible to keep continuity. So some of the numbers may be a little bit off.
Well, and I guess that's the next part is, now, you know, for projects from prior years, underspending, which I shouldn't say that, but where the project cost is less than the project estimate, excess monies allocated but not spent, or appropriated but not spent, comes back to the capital stabilization fund. And I guess the question is, I know Mr. Pasturzik tracks all that stuff, what does that do and how much is that? And I assume that's probably on that same sheet you had around.
It is on that same sheet, actually, and we're going through the process. So probably there's a little bit more to be closed out, but not a lot.
Okay.
So the addition was how much?
I think within the capital stabilization fund, on that sheet, I believe the balance is $10,000.
Oh, so
And we'll close out, a couple thousand more at best.
That's it.
It's not much.
Anything else for Dr. Metz? No? Again, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next step in regards to capital planning, I know, Richard, you said you were going to be sending some questions,
Well, I don't know,
and,
I don't know whether it's a send or we have a meeting and talk about the thing.
but I thought maybe.
Maybe I just throw my questions out, and maybe they're, maybe just say the devil and throw them in the trash.
No, don't throw them out. I think we ought to hear
Because, I
them.
mean, I have questions that start to get down into details, and there's some concerns that I have for programs, like, I see the exhaust fans show up, phase two, Mr. Sturkley shows up at Wolf Swamp. And, we spent $45,000 2 years ago on exhaust fans. And now all of a sudden, we've found another $26,000 worth of the things. And it's like what I said before, we went through the asbestos over there, and we just thought we had it and came back, and then, it comes back to the same thing. We don't have a good plan. And it's consistently thrown in our face like this, and it's no one's fault, it's just we haven't sat down and done it. That's the problem. But this is typical, and it's 40, I believe it's 45, I didn't check it yet, and there's 26 this year, and there was 45 last year. Well, it's $80,000 we spent in exhaust fans at a structure that, quite honestly, we don't know what we're going to do with. Seriously, we don't. Now, Dr. Metz said 7 years, I don't know where he got the 7 years from. But I haven't heard that. And I know that the schools had a study committee, I thought they had a committee reviewing this, and, we've got proposals where we're getting ready to spend some major dollars. And I'm not a firm believer that if the boiler works here, it goes here and it works there, because that sounds good in this room, but it doesn't work in practicality. It just doesn't wash properly. Mark, like the windows at the high school, yeah, they're in a junk heap or they've been sold at a store now. They weren't used, and we, $700,000-800,000 on windows. So I just see us continuing, and it's nobody's fault except we need to just stop and get back and sit down in one good room and set a plan to go for the future. And I just see repeats coming up on this, Marie. That's what bothers me. And I went through these, as I was telling Stephen, I spent a day and a half looking just at the Capitol, and I have a lot of questions, and I know Stephen's not gonna have the answers. I mean, it's not, I know he's not gonna have them. These are questions that the engineers have to answer, or that Mike would have to answer, So it's not fair for me to try to ask these type of questions of the town manager. And I'm just inquisitive on it, okay? I'll be quite honest, because I think we should be spending dollars appropriately and only spending them once. and doing it right the first time. I'm a really hardcore believer. I'd rather postpone it for 3 years and do it right than to get caught in this piecemeal, because that piecemeal, we just keep doing chunks. And, you know, like Mark brought up this unbelievable one now on these fans. You know, whatever was wasted, if it was, it sounds like there could have been money wasted by a bad decision. And 6 months later, it's back before this board to spend $150,000 on those fans. And the money's tight. I mean, Stephen knows that. He saw these sheets. It's tight. Dollars are extremely tight.
And I think that's where we run into deciding where our priorities are in town, because like I know you and I have discussed on how we really have to get ahead of the roads, get
Right.
ahead of the sidewalk issue. And do we really want to keep patching these old buildings? But when it comes to how we're going to spend money in town, can we really afford to do the job right the first time?
Yeah.
Or do we have to keep doing these patches because we have a crisis on the roads or the sidewalks? So
Yeah.
that's a decision this board probably has to make on where they're going to put their priorities in the
Well-
capital, and if we're gonna increase our capital investment.
And I think the town manager is starting to look, you know, at this type of stuff. And this is the type of stuff that we need to see. Because this does set direction. Because this shows you very quickly where you're not in the right place. And this is like city stat stuff, I'm sure. This is the type of data that needs to be brought in, these best maintenance practices, to put up against what we're doing now. And then the deficiencies come up on a board, and we don't sit and argue about them, we sit and cure them. And we figure out how to stop it and how to change directions. And I think everybody wants to do that. But we gotta get a handle on it someplace, and I don't see us getting a handle on it. I just kinda see us going down the same road. And I'm not saying that Stephen's not trying to get a handle on it, because I really think he is. And maybe I'm just very, very impatient, because I've seen it now for 3 or 4 years, and maybe that's my real problem. Because I'd like, you know, I see some things, I said, I'd like to stop it now. You know, and especially in here, you know, if you're gonna put in exhaust fans one year on a thing, why didn't you look at the whole building and tell us exactly how many exhaust fans, or did you think that's the only piece that we would buy? That's what bothers me. And I've seen, and you know, I've complained about this for 3 or 4 years, so this is not the first project that looked like it was whole that turned into a phase. We went through the asbestos tile, that was a phase type thing, and it just kept nickel diming us. And that was when I was on Capitol. I was pulling my hair out, son, and said, would you please tell me how much you need, so we get it done at one time? So,
Well, being the new high school, I hope that's not a phase. that
no,
you're
no,
looking at.
it's not there, and I think it's more systemic, Marie. I think it's systemic, and I think Stephen and I have talked about it. It's the procedures and the standards and the inspections. It's the whole thing on how we build the backbone of our problem, or our program, because everything here should be backed up by a program that's underneath it that is kind of bulletproof. You're not gonna shoot holes in it. Like what Mark brought up tonight, in a wonderful working society, we wouldn't have the problem that we just mentioned. It wouldn't have been a problem, because that decision would have been made appropriately at that time. And it would have had buy-in from all the stakeholders. And I think you're right, Mark. I think it may have legs of its own. It may not be as large of a problem as we think, but we don't know for sure. But you know, we know something possibly is going to be done with Glenbrook and Williams. It's been talked about, and isn't it about time we make a decision? And at least say, yes, this is where we think we're going, so that we can make every other decision for the next 3 years behind that decision, or that ultimate goal. But right now, that ultimate goal's not in front of us, and we're making decisions off to the side. And one way, I think we're wasting money. Yeah, Mark.
Richard, I agree with you, Richard. The biggest problem is, it all comes down to money. And the way we make decisions is we compromise funds. And you know, we can say, well, are we gonna do something with whether it's a DPW facility or schools? But the next question is, so how much is it gonna cost? And then, you know, how much money are we willing to spend to get the answer to that question? Because you can't get the answer to that question without spending some significant amount of money. I mean, we had to do a very, 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 you know, high six-figure feasibility study to look at the high school. And so if you start going down that road, you're essentially saying, are we willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to find out what's the best answer and what the cost is for the high schools, or should we take that $100,000 and use it to put on some Band-Aids? And I don't know what the right answer is. Clearly, Band-Aids wear out, and you gotta put on more Band-Aids and more Band-Aids. But my personal perception is that there has been recent tax sticker shock by town residents, and it's unlikely, but I don't know, but it seems unlikely that we'd go along with something that would give us an additional shock very, very soon. But, I could be wrong, and so based on my perception, I'm going down the road of saying, we've got to take the approach of making the systems we have work to the point where, until they can't work anymore. Hence, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's where I came with the air handlers or anything else that may come along. The question is, what I think isn't broken, other people may think is broken, so. It's a tough question, I agree with you, but.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with the thing that you're saying, but I think we at this table, every person at this table knows right now that there's no way when we roll it up that it's not gonna be sticker shock, but we're not gonna get the money to do it at one time. But I think what bothers me most is that we haven't really started to roll it up right. To bring it all up into one document so we know it and we look at it and say, my God, this is what we have as deficiencies.
But money is fungible, so how do we prioritize repairs or improvements to the middle schools versus repairs or improvements to our sewers, our roads, and our storm drainage systems? Because it's the same dollar. We can say one's on general tax revenue and one's in enterprise. It's all the same dollar, it's the same people paying for it. And so the answers become we're not juggling repair the middle schools versus replace the high schools. We're juggling repair the middle schools versus replace the high schools versus redo our storm sewer outfalls. And so when that added complexity almost makes it to the point where we end up where we are now, which is, fix what's broken and put everything else till next year.
But see, I hear what you say, but I know that's not what you believe.
That's right.
Okay?
That's
You've
right.
said something that you don't believe, because I know you well enough to know where your beliefs are. And your
you're-
beliefs are in aligned 100% with the way I think.
Yeah, you're right. But
Okay, but you've said something that's not aligned that way.
Because it's a tough financial decision.
Yeah,
It
see,
still is, repair a school, replace a school versus roads versus all the other things on the
That was
list.
what this process was supposed to be. Capital plan is supposed to rank priorities, objective overview of needs in the community. Objective overview.
Except, Paul, that the capital planning committee originally had a broad overview, but they had a restriction. They didn't look at anything under $10,000, and they didn't look at anything over, I think it was $250, because that was gonna be bonded. And so, the capital planning committee started stepping outside of that, around the time I was in capital planning, most certainly when Richard, and started looking at bonding bigger projects and stuff. But clearly, water, sewer, those were different from putting aside 2% of tax revenue, and how do you prioritize the spending of that 2% tax revenue? And then that totally got blown out of the water when we built this public safety complex. So you're right, but it's a tough call.
And I think what has to be when we're talking about the middle schools and whether we're gonna Band-Aid it or where replacement is and trying to have a master plan, but we have also in front of us this year, the DPW complex, on what we're gonna be doing with that. So I can see where you're saying we need to have a major long-term plan on where we're going with things, and the same thing stands with Greenwood Center. We put a lot of money in Greenwood Center the past few years. We're talking about putting more in it. What is our long-term planning? And does this board feel they want to have a workshop where we sit down and deal with the long-term larger issues? Or should you ask your questions and then we have a second select board meeting where we discuss this specific capital plan and deal with the global issues later? What does the board feel is the best next step?
I think it's interesting, some of the projects Stephen dropped off. I wished I had had his list, because he dropped some that I looked at kind of sideways myself, so I'd be interested to see the whole list, because I was looking over here trying to see if I had the updated stuff. Strategic planning never hurts. Like Mr. Gold and I, he just made a statement, which I know is not in his heart, but he made a statement that politically was the right statement today. But I know he feels the same way I do. I don't care how large the puzzle is, at least get the puzzle made and then start to pick away at it, because you'll never have a plan to get rid of it until you know how large it is. And we've got a lot of data right now, but we've never fully assembled and put it together as one big chunk to look at. He mentioned about the priorities. He knows, it was rhetorical that he was giving me, because he knows exactly how you would set priorities. Yeah, I mean, he rhetorically said it, how do you do it? Well, he knows exactly how to do it.
I was the one who put together that priority.
But I mean, even by
page
your
that they
profession,
still working on.
even by your profession, you know exactly how to set these priorities. These are really not secretive processes for people that work in that type of arena.
Now, who do you need, so you're suggesting we get the strategic workshop together, and who would you want there at that meeting?
The more the merrier. No, it really, if you follow what some of the other areas have done on strategic planning, you know, they get a very large cross-reference. And they sit and talk. And, you know, we've got some plans that were made up in this community many years ago that we've never revisited. There is a master plan, and there was a strategic plan, and I don't think, I've only been 2 or 3 years around, but I know I've not seen it revisited. And I don't know what parts were actually implemented, so, you know, maybe we don't invent the wheel again, maybe we go back and look at the wheel and see what it looked like, and roll it forward and do it again. Pardon?
The long-range
Yeah, there are some plans that they're sitting on the shelves that have not been, you know, we got a new town manager, new thoughts, full of energy.
Well, I know you and I have talked about it, and some towns do it in the summer, and they have a massive
Oh,
group of
yeah.
people together, work about it. But we're coming up on the budget season. Are you saying you feel before we even look at this?
No, absolutely not. We don't have time to do it before we,
Okay,
no.
so you're talking about maybe later down the road,
Yeah, I
start
think-
setting that up
I
and
think
getting
this budget
moving.
year is already set. We're gonna grumble and fight about some things, but what we're talking about is a lot bigger than just this budget
Okay.
season. It's the future direction of
Mm-hmm.
the community instead of the present direction. And,
I think one question I'd have that that I'm curious about, because of my lack of experience with town meeting form of government, is how much does the role open town meeting plays in determining the budget factor into the history that has led to the points we're at now that you're talking about? I mean, it occurs to me that nobody sitting in this room, other than by virtue of, you know, raising your card, ultimately gets to decide what the town budget is. It can be amended on the floor of open town meeting, and I've only been to one of those, or one annual town meeting, one special town meeting. I'd be interested to hear during this dialogue how past town meetings have redirected priorities, and see how that plays in. So that's just a question,
Yeah.
not to be answered now.
Rhetorical.
Every
Rhetorical, yeah, everyone.
Every meeting,
Yeah.
there's some challenge to some warrant article that changes the outcome of the budget.
But it doesn't mean we don't keep working on a long-range
Right.
plan. That's,
But he's got a very valid point. I mean, that has to be taken into consideration. And I don't know, maybe if you can build the bridges and get the alliances in, it's a big task, but you're right. I mean, we can have something absolutely change at town meeting by a very small percentage of our residents. Regardless of how much we stomp and scream, it's gonna change if the little cards are waved in the air. And I think we experienced last year, I mean, it could have been catastrophic. And it is our form of government. It's the truest form of democratic representation. But it can raise havoc, especially when we've spent hours and hours and hours angling and twisting over something in anguish to get it up, and then boom, we're blown out of the water because it's an impulse item that somebody wants to endorse. And that's, you know, what we've chatted a little bit since that, and we've chatted with the Charter Commission, and, you know, what's the best way to deal with it? I mean, we know, I think even, Stephen, you've been here close to a year now, you can see how large this task is we got in front of us. It's big. And, I mean, you're seeing more and more the depths of our deficiencies and how much money it's gonna take to bring about a change and set a new direction, even where we feel comfortable in the direction we're going, because I think we're still being very reactive. And unfortunately, sometimes you're right, Mark, sometimes it's a Band-Aid, because you've gotta put a Band-Aid on. You can't do anything but a Band-Aid, and it's unfortunate. But when you get so far to the other side, Band-Aids are the most readily and the most prescribed treatment, and that's unfortunate. You know, like we brought out at the thing that Paul taped, I said, you know, people in the town may get very confused when they see Mike Rabel working on a good road, but he's spending the dollars as wise as he can, because X amount of dollars spent on a good road surface extends it way on out, as opposed to the same dollars put on a bad road, which has no return. And they have to understand that there's, some things are very confusing in the way maintenance works, but it's
Yeah,
just the way it
that's-
works.
That's a perfect example, and I don't want to extend the conversation, but I think it is illustrative that, because this is something we went through, every town goes through this. I know the 2 towns I've managed, we've gone through it. You'll have a road that is in terrible condition, but the underground needs to be replaced. And that's adds an exponential cost or increase to the cost of the project. And so you'll have roads that are, where the underground, the water sewer lines, things like that, are good, so you can just overlay that road. And so people at home who may not be as fully aware of what happens underground with the infrastructure that you can't see, may not understand why you just don't resurface the road that's in terrible condition. Well, it's because this year you only have, you don't have the money to do the $1 million project. You only have $100,000 to do the overlay, and and certainly it does not make Long Meadow unique. Again, I think it's, I guess the way I view it is, I try, one of the aphorisms from public administration school that I learned was, you can't turn a super tanker on a dime. And that I think describes most layers of government, but change when the outcome or the decision-making outcomes aren't necessarily within our power. It's at the open town meeting. And so it's really a process of educating and delivering, good priorities in a unified way, so the community understands that the level of effort that the board has put into understanding things and presenting them, like I said, in a unified fashion, so the townspeople know what the priorities of the board are. And it won't be for a lack of knowledge that the decisions are made.
I think, Richard, we've talked to some of those other towns who really made a difference in their
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I think there were policies they put into place that seemed to make small changes in the beginning, especially in the funding
Right.
and the dedication of funds, and that slowly starts moving them in their direction. So I think I agree with you. We need to look at strategic planning as well as a changing in our funding policies. And maybe this will start
Well,
making
there's some very
changes.
successful communities that have
Yeah.
pulled it off. What was that one we talked to? I mean, they
Took a while, but
changed the
they
whole
did it.
bond rating and everything
Yeah.
else, just by some major, but what they did is they showed a plan. They said, we're
Yeah.
gonna tackle it. And they're tackling it now, and they can tell you when it's gonna be finished. That's the neat thing about it. They say by year 2022 or whatever, our roads are gonna be at this standard, and we're gonna be able to keep them there with this many dollars with an inflationary factor. But it didn't happen overnight.
No.
And it took a lot of meetings and public meetings and giving presentations similar to what you put up here, but doing it at a town meeting or doing, Paul did a session at his show. I mean, every time you get an opportunity to talk to people about things and educate them, we're moving farther down the road. I think there's been very little outreach, activity to the community in different, and Paul's doing it with his show, consistently does, and we've done some in front of the cameras here, but I think there's an untapped amount of energy that we can do to communicate with the public.
Yeah.
And slowly turn them around and convince them that, yeah, this is very, very important, and we got a major problem we're trying to solve. I wish I could tell you that I have the same excitement that the schools can generate. I wish I could say that, seriously. That I could take a problem up and say, I've got a $400 million problem, please help me fix it. And nobody wants to talk, they just look the other way.
But I think we put your infrastructure talk on the website, and I think people have been responding and have been following it. Be nice to have this presentation also put on the website. And I think it's worth it to plan a strategic session. And like you said, there's usually a lot of people involved with that. So I'll sit down with you and we'll try to figure out who we need to invite. Maybe try to aim towards the end of April. We should have the budget done by then.
I think the one community that I looked at and saw what they were doing, they were so successful, they did it really in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
They went out and bought a big tent, put it out in the green, and they invited the town folks in, had big barbecues, and they had different breakout sessions. And it was unbelievable, the stuff that was starting to generate.
What was that town again? I don't know what you mentioned. Westford?
Westport.
Westport.
Westford.
Westford,
Westford.
okay.
That's up by my neck of the woods.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
doing a lot of neat things.
Yeah.
Back on agenda.
Oh, pardon?
So are we back on agenda?
Oh, yes, well, that capital planning was. And anything else in regards to capital plan? No? Anything you wanted to, I guess, town manager reports? Anything you want to add?
Very briefly, we did kick off that
Oh, wait,
step.
did you want to say anything, or did we have any questions for Paul? No? Okay.
You haven't been excused from the table.
But
Oh,
we-
okay.
but we had the treasurer's report, but I think.
Okay, we don't need to do anything with the treasurer's report then?
Oh, unless you have a question, I didn't know it was on the agenda, so.
No?
But
Did
it's
you
kind
have
of
any questions on-
straightforward.
Okay, we'll let you know. Thank you.
I'll just, since we've kind of gone on here a little bit, I will just leave it at the StatNet project that we've talked about is kicking off. I do think that some of the places that we all want to get to, I'm not gonna say this project's gonna get us there, but it'll certainly open up some pathways for us that don't exist today. We did, as you can see in the police department report, there were some break-ins. Mark, you know that at the beginning of the meeting. I know we say it all the time, lock your car doors. And then sometimes, it's amazing how you get the police reports and it says car doors were unlocked at the time of break-in. And then, I know there's a broader discussion with the schools about the full-day kindergarten, and I'm not gonna delve into that now, but other than to say that the town, through Greenwood, through our Parks and Recreation Department at Greenwood, offers half-day kindergarten now. And it's possible that we would cease to do that if there was a full-day kindergarten, and I just want to kind of put that out there so people aren't surprised. It would be, Barry Jarvis has been working with me on preparing an analysis of that we will present at an upcoming board meeting, depending on what happens with the full-day kindergarten proposal. It'd be premature to kind of lay that out now if we don't know what's happening, but that is a consideration.
Could you explain to the residents what StatNet is? I think it's a wonderful
Oh,
program.
UMass Boston through the Collins Center has a grant-funded project where there's a system. It was really started in bigger cities. I think Baltimore was the first city to do that, and using statistical information that gets collected by municipalities routinely and looking at it in a different way to identify not only areas for improvement, but also areas where successes are being achieved, and it was called CompStat. And it just is really, at its very essence, it is data-based or data-driven performance management. And just in the brief presentation we saw from the folks at the Collins Center, we do collect a lot of data as a matter of our software. When we're entering information, a lot of data gets collected. We don't really use it because, not to say we don't know how, but asking the right questions in a way that can really show you something about your performance is a trick. And they are going to help us ask those questions and learn how to. The first phase of this is focused on police and DPW because those are the most heavily data-driven ones. And I'm just in the brief presentation, some of the slides they showed from other communities, I know we're going to learn a lot about ourselves, and that'll make us really well equipped to be as efficient as we possibly can be.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just have, Stephen, can you send us sometime in the next week or so two things? One is, what's our snow clearing expenditures year to date? I know we're allowed to overspend, but it will impact our free cash and other things in the springtime.
I think that's in here.
Okay, whatever, and and the other thing is.
We're substantially over, obviously.
Well, clearly, I mean, the budget was set at some, is.
100,000, yeah.
Right, 100,000. And secondly, can you also send us what our expenditures are to date on the casino mitigation discussions now that we've gotten to this point, and if there's a projection on what any additional expenditures we might have going through the final 30 days of negotiation? It would be just helpful for me based on, I guess, attorney's fees and any consulting fees we got.
The only thing I'll say is that, as I think it's public information based on our counter proposal, that the reimbursement for those fees has been a negotiating point.
Correct.
And so I hesitate to send it out publicly, but certainly we can work through our attorney and
Okay,
communicate
that's
that
fine.
information to you.
Fine.
Anything else?
No, and you said that sheet that you had is in the packet, right, Debbie? The sheet that he had tonight, the modifications to the capital
Yeah,
plan?
that's
Yeah, it was.
Okay, okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Debbie.